This is the second part of my video AMA for my 500 video, which was obviously the previous video, at least the previous part of this series. And there ended up being so many good questions, or so many worthwhile questions in the comments section, that I decided to do a second part. And the further one was pretty long anyway, so I'll link that up here. So we're going to get right into it. There was a question by a guy called Raul Zakia, and he did this thing which I am not a fan of in AMAs. I really don't like it, where someone asks like 10 questions. In fact, this guy asked 12 questions, a bunch of them so long in how they were written out that just one alone is not only your allotted amount, but would take a while to answer. So as with most of those scenarios, unless I really feel like it, I'm not going to answer all 12 questions. And it's just a little bit selfish. Like, think of the best 2 questions you have, then ask those ones. Don't waste everyone's time, because the worst thing is, in most AMAs, people aren't as diligent as I am, aren't going to spend 8 hours straight answering at great length. So if you ask 10 really good questions, and they are really good, and the guy answers them all, he's not answering, say, 9 other questions from other people in the AMA. And really, the AMA is about answering a spread of questions from many people, not just about one guy. You may as well just interview him at that point in time. So I'm going to answer a few of these. I'm just going to skip the ones I don't find interesting, or that are just egregious in terms of how many he asked. So number 1, how did you get to the level of public speaking that you currently display at analysis desks and in your videos? How did you practice? What did you specifically do? Right, first of all, I've never practiced anything for analysis desks, and I never did something specifically with like a set goal in mind in that sense. But it's worth bringing this up, because people would look at me now and think to themselves, this is a guy who naturally has on-camera charisma. He has natural chemistry with people, or he's naturally comes off as a funny guy in public, or he has confidence speaking and all these sorts of things. Whereas actually not the case at all in pretty much every one of those respects. What happened was, when I first started out in journalism, I started out posting news and doing written text interviews. My main strength was written text interviews, where I had as much time as I wanted. I asked the questions, I could rephrase them, I could ask a follow-up question, and there was no pressure in that respect as long as the guy had enough time to answer my questions. Then I started going to events with a site called gamers.nu, which was a Swedish website. And at these events, video interviews didn't exist yet for us at our level, because we didn't have enough money for video cameras at the time, and we needed someone to operate, etc. So what I was doing was recorded audio interviews. So I had a little like dictaphone type thing, and the interview I think could last a maximum of 10 minutes on this free software. And generally, I don't think many of them ever went over 5 minutes. And what I would do is, after a match, I would get a player and I would do an interview with him, and sometimes 2 players like who are going to play a match coming up, for example, and it would be like 3 minutes long. And in that, I would ask simple things about the game. And what's funny is, at the time, I was actually terrible at keeping the interview going. The second I got rattled or just got nervous talking to the guy, I would just like forget what I was going to say. And if I forgot what I was going to say, I would just panic and I would just end the interview. I'd be like, yeah, right, that's any final words, something like just be the end of the interview, right? Even if I then thought, oh shit, I didn't ask about that, and so most of these interviews weren't very long. It was basically like, how long can I maintain composure, how long can I remember what I want to say, and how long can I string questions together before it all just falls apart. And so what happened was, over time, I worked on this, and the way I worked on it was, I just kept doing it, and I kept reflecting. How did it actually feel when you were in the moment where it was like you were worried in that sense? Like, what could you have asked as like a question to keep things going while you were trying to figure out the next question? Like, these sorts of things. And things I thought about, some of the basics of it was, first and foremost, I thought to myself, wait a minute, I'm not even on camera here. Technically, people can only hear my voice. So first and foremost, it doesn't really matter even how I look in this scenario. Like, even if I look like, oh, I'm panicking, I'm worried, I don't know what's going on now. As long as my voice sounds fine, which comes generally, by the way, from speaking a little bit slower, a bit more calmly, more thought out, then in that scenario, it's not going to matter that I might actually be like choking and worried and all this of it. So first of all, I thought that through. That allowed me to extend it a little bit. Then I started to think, okay, and if I was to keep doing this, then really, you know, in this scenario, like, the player might even help me out. So then sometimes if I didn't know what to do, I would just ask the player a question that like not just that one he can answer, but one that like he can talk mostly on, like, and what do you think about the tournament? And then they'll just answer blah 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 blah, blah, and that'll give me time to think of something else, or they'll just give their own thing that I can then jump off myself. So they're helping me out in that sense. They're part of a team, and that's like about as far as I got in the early years. Then there was a few years where I was just doing online work and I wasn't going to events. And when I started going back to events big time, which was literally, I mean, at that point in time, we're talking about 6 years later that I start going back to events full on. And when I go back to events now I'm doing video interviews. Now I'm not on camera, but I'm doing video interviews with the people. And another kind of epiphany that came to me is that I went back and I would watch the interviews over for the part where it got awkward or where I couldn't really keep it going. And I noticed that to me, it felt like this had lasted like a minute, or I hadn't spoken for 35 seconds. In fact, when I looked at the interview, no joke, it was usually never more than 5 seconds while I was trying to think of something, because in the moment of when you're having to do the question, that part of the interview, time feels incredibly long, actually. You have a different experience of it than the viewer does. And what I realized was, first of all, even if it had been 10 seconds, as long as I then do in fact ask something, people just forget about the fact there was a 10-second gap and they start listening to what the question is and then what the player answers. So it doesn't matter that there's a little gap. And again, it's the same principle. Doesn't matter what happens. Oh, I could also edit, by the way, but ignoring that. There's also the fact that it doesn't really matter what you're thinking or what you might look like as long as you just keep going. And so in this scenario, I was learning how to use these tricks to get through past my own mind to allow me to extend the interview. And the funny thing is, after about a year of doing that particular method, especially, that is the one that really kicked me in the gear. Because beyond that, I'm now at the level where I can make an interview or a video last literally as long as I want. Doesn't matter if I forget what I was going to say. I don't get nervous anymore, so that's not there anymore. I mean, I have done lots and lots and lots of these. Like, I have just made myself do it over and over and over and over again, where I've got such dramatic exposure to it. I'm in no way uncomfortable. Like, I'm even comfortable in, like, awkward silence, etc. It's not an issue whatsoever for me. So I have gotten to an insane level in that particular sense. But I've just got all these methods in place, which mean that it's up to me how long the interview lasts and how I want to do it and all the rest of it. And I just don't have the same concern. So the fact that I did all that before I started appearing on camera is certainly helpful. Like, I first started doing on camera, being a color commentator actually with Joe Miller for IEM in January of 2010. Now, what's funny is my experience with interviews, even though interviews are very different, like, there's a lot of people out there who are good at one-on-one interviews and on-camera interviews and talk shows who, if you put them on a desk or commentary, I'm sorry, they would just choke. Like, I couldn't tell you necessarily which ones they were. It's difficult to know. But some of them would just choke, and it would be so bad that they wouldn't be able to get through it, and they would just give up, basically. But what I found, bizarrely, was, perhaps because I'd done hundreds of these interviews and really put a lot of effort into this and been very reflective about it, and especially notice one of the key details isn't even about what I necessarily did, but more how I saw myself and how I was able to look outside what I was experiencing and see that for other people it wasn't a big deal, and how a lot of these like concerns were just in my own mind and were limitations of my own mind, and by transcending them, arrive at the position that everyone else was in, which was, it's not a big deal if the guy doesn't talk for 2 seconds and then asks a not that great question, but then allows him to get to a good question when he bounces off the guy's answer. So in that sense, it imbued me with a feeling that I'm always in my comfort zone. Nothing's really that bad. Like, I used to think to myself, for example, say it's gone really bad in the interview. Okay, so I could end the interview now, right? I always have, that's always an option I have to relieve any pressure or any concern. I can just end the interview now. That's a little like parachute. And I'm not going to hit the ground at any point. I can pull that at any point and I'm safe and I'm done. So, if I can't think of anything to say, how about try asking another question and see if something comes to my mind? Try asking 2 questions, just extend it a little bit. And in that sort of mentality, as soon as you feel like you don't really have anything else, you're just in bonus time at that point in time. I mean, what's the concern, right? If people don't like it at that point, you could even put a note, I don't really have much at the last minute. So the whole point is you free your mind of any concern in this particular sense. And so, in this world, because I became so comfortable with the idea that it's more just about the content of what am I getting out there, what am I asking, doing it in a calm and prepared manner, this made it so that, believe it or not, from the first instant I was on a commentary desk, I never had any nerves, and I never displayed any like, oh, I'm choking, or I'm worried, or I'm concerned. I was actually pretty calm from the beginning, and I had this sort of a tone, where it's like, here's kind of what I think, like there's an authority behind it, because you can see like I'm not like stuttering, or I'm not, oh, gosh, but what can I, and then I'm not overly couching it in caveats, like, oh, but I'm not sure. Not. It just comes with like there's the natural forthrightness to it. I'm going to say it, I'm going to execute what I say, speak slowly enough that I can get the words out, and I can put them in order, and I can get my thoughts together, and I'm not running over myself or tripping over myself. And because of this, believe it or not, from my first ever event, people like Joe Miller, Too Good, etc., would ask me stuff like, "Oh, have you done this before?" Like, "Oh, wow, you're really good at this. Like, how you doing all this stuff? How are you remembering it all?" And obviously, I couldn't explain all this stuff. Then I was like, "Oh, well, it's just going well or whatever." And what I found in time was, when it came to the analysis desk, which you don't even have the game as a stimuli there, it's just all about this sort of thing: execution, slow, getting your thoughts out, creating space, trying to actually tag stuff onto what other people say in a way that's like synergistic. This helped me out a lot, I think, overall. Now, there's a few things I have specifically done on desks, but they're not really things like in general in terms of like public speaking. They're more things like I've mentioned in past videos, like I think I forget which video this would be in, but like, for example, find a specialty, pick band in my case, player performance, historical context. Work with people like Yanko, etc., to find their strengths and try and emphasize theirs. Try and figure out who can you make a joke with, who can you make what type of a joke with, how do you get the flow to go, when do you do banter, when do you do more serious analysis, depending on the sort of game it is and when it is in the tournament. All these are more the things I've more specifically gone into, because it's not that I've mastered the craft of public speaking. I certainly haven't. There's a lot of people much, much better than me. But I've gotten good to the extent that I'm working on small things at this point in time, and I'm just trying to improve tiny little aspects. And by the way, as a general rule, notice how in the evolution of my public speaking there, I never just did 5 things at once. I did one little tiny thing, and then I came to a sort of an epiphany about something, and then maybe I even evolved that further, or maybe I went a different route with that, and I tried one little technique here and gradually built that in. That is the way you improve at anything. You don't try and improve 10 things at once. Like, there's a great book on this. Let me think, what's it called? I think it's called The Inner Game of Tennis, and it makes an excellent point that if you want to improve someone's tennis game, you don't tell them the 10 things they're doing wrong. This is a flaw, actually, that a guy that I like, a friend of mine, LS, runs into sometimes when he does those really good videos for coaching. Now, the reason those videos are amazing for us, the viewer, is because we can watch the video 50 times over and we can go through all of your detail. The problem for LS is that unless his student goes and watches it over again, I feel like they're going to get bombarded with too much info, because he breaks down every little detail they did wrong. Now, if they took one little detail, corrected that, went back, watched the video again, tried to take another, now he's given them a treasure trove of info. Maybe that's his logic. But if they only listened that one time, they're not going to pick up on most of it, and they're not going to be able to do 10 things differently. And doing 10 things differently initially is going to make you way worse. Whereas you want to improve one tiny little thing, get that to a decent level, maintain that, and then start to add in other things. That's how you improve at anything. And that's why the idea that you have to like get really good super fast is ridiculous, because you're not trying to do that in any particular sense whatsoever. You're actually buying into the idea that I want to be better at this. I'm not necessarily going to be the best or perfect, so I'm just going to gradually improve. And as I see gradual improvement, to me it's going to seem like tiny improvement. But as in the case of this, where I couldn't do a 4-minute interview with certain players who I thought were amazing, that'll be like 14 years ago or something. Well, yeah, now I can do a 5-hour talk show if I want, and continually be talking, continually keeping things going, never run out of things. This is the result of the gradual improvement. That seems like a massive, drastic improvement, right? And to people who are watching, they just assume, oh, that's just natural skill or talent or ability. Oh, you're just lucky in that particular sense. One other thing I will say as well is that part of the fact that I always had this natural confidence and could carry myself, etc., on camera, in this sense, comes from that great quote by the legendary basketball coach John Wooden of UCLA, where he said something like, confidence comes from preparation. The point is, if you've prepared and you've put in work and you've tried to improve, etc., you will naturally have a confidence from that to then execute what you are doing. You won't then be worried about what you didn't do, or what you could have done, or the unknown. Or you kind of know what's going on there. And now it's about, how do I get these words that are in my mind, through my mouth, out to people in a reasonable manner that they're going to enjoy, or it's going to be worthwhile what I'm saying and have meaning to it. That becomes the focus then, not the moment. What are people thinking of me? And, is what I'm saying good enough? And all that. Like, here's the thing. I won't always give the best analysis. Might not always have a really good point. But when my section comes and someone points to me in a nice suit and a good haircut or bald and says, please say something, Thorin, for money, I say my part either way. So that mentality means I will always be able to carry myself in that particular sense. Okay, then the guy says, nothing I can do about this, mate. And fuck editing. Can you walk us through the process of making a Thorn's Thoughts video? How long does the preparation take? How can you talk so fluently while being so specific at the same time? Do you write the main points on the screen? How can you remember every idea that you want to share in a video? Now, a lot of these questions, like even the tone of them, where he's kind of like a little bit, like he doesn't understand, it's like a bit astonishing, like, how are you doing this? It's like, again, this is just you not realizing the small nuances and things I've worked on that come across as some sort of skill, or come across so fluid, and the outside product looks so polished that it seems like it's all seamless. It doesn't seem like there's all these different aspects working at once. So first of all, the process of making a video, one of the reasons I never run out of topics to making videos is a process of how I do my work in general in esports is coming up with ideas is different to working on the idea, and that is different to executing the idea. So I'm always working on this big compost heap of ideas, and some of them are never going to go anywhere, some of them will never be used, but I'm just working on this massive amount of ideas. Some of them ideas from years ago that I might want to bring out and use now. Some of them ideas I want to do one day, but this isn't the right moment. I'm not feeling like I want to work on that right now. Some of them very topical things. I'm not going to get through all of them now. I'm going to use some of them. And what I'm doing in this compost heap is I'm kind of like moving it around, stirring it up a bit. And I'm trying to figure out which ideas do I really want to do. Like which ones just seemed like a good idea or a topical idea. I'm not really vibing with that. I don't really have anything particularly interesting to say about that. And in the process of doing this, just thinking about it mainly, like I'll write the idea down as like a text file or something, but mainly what I'm doing here is just mulling it over in my mind, and I'm going through the ideas that come to me initially when I think of the idea, and then an idea that comes to me as I kind of ruminate on the idea or try to think of what does that connect to actually, what is that similar to, and then see if I get an idea from that. And then when I've got like enough, and it feels like the moment that I want to do this particular idea, then I'll write out a couple of notes. And my notes, none of them, here's the thing, it's not a script. I actually think scripts are bad for public speaking because personally, I think people get too obsessed with trying to read the script, and you can tell when someone's reading. I'm not reading in any of these videos. What the script will say is something like, it'll be like, played for Dignitas, good at Cobble. That will be it. And then the idea is, I know what the point I'm going to make about Cobble is. And I don't have to say it because it's on the note. So there's general points like that. And the whole thing is, my skill is someone speaking and thinking and knowing how to structure. This is probably the best skill, is knowing how to structure it overall so that I know which thought should come after another and how to weave the story. Then that's like, yeah, that's a practice, that's talent, that's routine, rhythm, etc. That's stuff I've built up. And you'll notice when I have a little break when I don't do them, I'm not always as great when I come back again as when I'm doing them every single day, etc. Then I kind of get that skill down. I've kind of got the rhythm of what I'm supposed to be doing in that particular sense. There is also the factor that a lot of people might have good ideas, but not only do they not know how to structure them, but they're not particularly articulate with how they'll speak about the idea. Now, not only am I thinking about these ideas all the time, but I have conversations like Thorin's Thoughts episode. I mean, you could ask like Moses, someone, etc. Talking to me in private, if you're a friend of mine, is like being part of an interactive Thorin's Thoughts episode. This is the way I talk and think all the time. Like, that's one of the things people don't understand. This isn't some sort of mad act for the camera where like nothing like that. It's not like one of those scenarios where it's like the best comedian is like always tortured in private, like, oh, I actually hate life and nothing makes me laugh. Like, no, I'm actually quite like this. Like, if anything, I tone it down a bit for desks. I'm not as outrageous as I would be in a green room, but there's obviously an element of persona in terms of I add in some showmanship, and I have to be on a lot more than I would be in real life, and I have to be sometimes more upbeat, or sometimes can't just go super brutal in a way that I might in private if it was something I was pissed off about. But in general, it's authentic, and as a result, I can produce it on demand. That's why one of the most ridiculous things that's happened in the last few years was last year, the CSGO event, Acer Predator Masters, where there was this scandal where this guy was hired called Raheem as a commentator for the event, and he is only famous for like 5 or 6 years in Counter-Strike 1.6 and CSGO for doing commentary where he's just saying like zany, crazy, wacky things that are absurd and don't even make sense and are just stupid sound effects. And then he was hired to literally do that, because that is literally what his fan base is about. It's not about great analysis and great commentary even, or technical skill. It's all about that wacky, zany sound. And when he was hired to do this, he wasn't doing it at this event that Richard was working at. And so Richard said to him, like, come on, do your babam thing. Which, by the way, babam is even like his catchphrase. That's something that he says, this guy. So when he said that, Richard was essentially trying to loosen him up. Like, come on, man. You know, like, get in your flow, do your thing. And everyone got outraged, like, oh, this is a disgrace. How can you demand that he do that stuff? By the way, he was literally being paid to do a job that very few people in the world can do. It's an incredibly skilled job. And he was taking up the spot, not doing his job to do that role. But here's the key detail. He then came out himself, that guy, and sort of suggested, like, you can't just be funny on demand. It's like, mate, that's literally the job, the skill that your skill set is essentially advertised for, why you were hired, and you can't do it personally. You are choking like a motherfucker, by the way. You need to be at home in your special chair with your wife bringing you, I don't know, baklava or whatever the fuck you guys eat, and no pressure and no cameras on you. You can't handle the pressure. So, in this particular sense, like, that's an example of where someone apparently isn't authentic. or hasn't worked on any of these skills, no matter whether people like him and think he's funny or charismatic, whatever. In this sense, this is authentic, so I can do this whenever I want. I can do it at the drop of a hat. Some Insight episodes I've done after like 1 hour's sleep when I had no food or anything. You'll never know which ones they are, because I still come and I deliver, not my A game, like my C game's pretty good, believe it or not. My D game's not that bad, so the ladies tell me. So, okay, next question. When he asks, like, how long did it take, by the way? I think an average video, the problem with that is you can't really know how long it takes between the time that I thought of the idea and then I actually execute it, and you can't know how long I actually spent thinking about it. So I'll just say in general, if we added up the raw time of like writing the idea down, thinking up a couple of ideas, adding them, like making the script and then recording it. I mean, let's say the video's 20 minutes. Then let's say 45 minutes for the average video. Depends how in-depth the topic is, Some of them are obviously things where I've had a general thought for a long time, or more importantly, I think this is maybe the way comedians work, I've had a little sub-thought that isn't connected to a big idea and I can't use right now, but I'll remember it and I'll think, yeah, I'll use that somewhere. And then eventually something will come up that'll connect to that and that'll add in. And now it'll seem like I've got all these great points for this one big central idea. And how did I come to these unique points that other people didn't? Well, because I've made my life into a process of coming up with these points. My main job in life, I get paid to execute ideas, to do written content, to do videos, to do on-camera analysis. But what allows all of that to be good and the showmanship and the technical skill to deliver it is I got to have the ideas. Coming up with ideas and developing ideas is my main way of making money. Now, the way I actually get the money, is I have to deliver the product to the people, to my bosses, all these sorts of things. But my main focus of my job, what I think of myself as, is someone who comes up with ideas that I then publish on the internet. And so mainly it's coming up with the ideas, coming up with my own perspective, coming up with ways of thinking about them, coming up with things that, even if sometimes they're not unique or just my ideas, a best way to encapsulate most of the arguments about something or most of the ways of talking about something and to condense it down. These are all things that I think of as the way I'm doing it. So let's have a look. And he says, how long and what do you do in order to prepare for an event where you work as an analyst? Now, first of all, I've worked at so many events. Like I've worked at over 30, maybe 33 or 32 events just as a desk analyst in CSGO since 2013, DreamHack Winter 2013, which is my first one doing that role. So I'm incredibly experienced at doing it. So as a result, I have a lot of the skill set down to do a pretty good job no matter what. So as a result, I'm not preparing in some sort of hardcore way. Like personally, first of all, most of my preparation is nearly always going to be continuing to watch and study the best games of the best teams, because they're the teams going deep in the tournament, they're the teams winning the tournament, they're the teams that are the most important, they're the teams that all the stories in general are going to be shaped around. So I want to know as much as I can about them, come up with as many innovative thoughts as I can about them, and try and craft how I think of them, and then what adds into that, what are the factors that make that storyline the way it is. So as a result, if I have extra time and there's some no-name team at an event like Epsilon, I'll watch a couple of Epsilon games, but in general, I'll just put even more of my free time into Envious or something like that. I'd rather watch more Envious games in the past or re-watch them. I'll get more from that and it will do more for the broadcast than if I watch every Epsilon game. Because first of all, doing analysis, you don't have loads of time anyway. And then secondly, when someone's not that well known as a team, I purposely want it to be that the audience feels that this guy's not actually that well known as a team. Like here's some of the basic things I know because I follow tier 1 and tier 2 events. Like they've played a couple of tier 2 events. Here's what happened here. Like I watched a few of their games. It seems like they're interested in this film. But what happened when they go against tier 1? I'm even setting the storyline like that because that's my role on the analysis desk. So I'm never putting mad work in that particular sense. But my life is Counter-Strike Global Offensive as well. It's a big part of it. So I'm watching it all the time. I'm rewatching it all the time. I'm talking to people about it all the time. So these things are always on my mind anyway. And again, I'm coming up with ideas for analysis stuff. So then when I come to the event, it's just which teams are there. And that's going to define how I then talk about that particular stuff. It's not like I have to sit down and go, right, I'm going to prepare specifically for this. Because I'm not doing that. Now, it's true, I do prepare the big band stuff. And I run through the numbers. And I try and figure out patterns. And I think about what the logic might be based on interviews of whether they're saying this or that. But that's something I'm always doing anyway. Like that's not something, it's just something that I codify for that specific event to get down the details so that I can nail it. Let's have a look here. Is there anything else actually worthwhile? Okay, I'll ask this one. Let's see. Are there any teams / in-game leaders who go so in depth that they even study the playstyle of a specific player, tendencies, spots, etc., in order to counter it? Can you give an example? In general, no. Like, there are some that do it a bit, by the way, it's nearly always in-game leaders. It's almost never players. Like a star player like Forrest is not spending any time trying to study the demos of even like a star player who's going to be a corresponding position or spot as him, who really he will in a way be dueling. They don't do that, believe it or not. They go just based on how they feel in practice, what resistance they feel from them, what ideas they have, and how they're feeling on that day. Pro players don't put in that much extra effort in that particular sense. Now, some of the really diligent in-game leaders will do some of this stuff to try and shut down an opponent or whatever, but even then, because they have to study all the maps and all the opponents and all the people that are going to be in the tournament, they don't have time to go super ham on this. This is an area where if the game gets big enough, there really will be coaches who do this sort of stuff. In fact, here's what's funny. I've had many offers in CSGO to be a coach of, by the way, some very notable teams. And if I ever was, this is one of the areas I would focus on. I would let the in-game leader take a lot of the other stuff and the team do some of the other stuff. But this is an area where I would take over and I would delegate this to myself and I would be able to give them info and raw data in this particular sense. I mean, I've always said this, something I'd said with Lurpus literally about like 6 years ago, that the first team to successfully integrate really good single star player heat maps of where they do well and where they don't do well on T side and CT side and implement that will become like a world champion after not being at that level themselves. Like that could really transform you if you did a good enough job at that. Now maybe people don't know how to do that, so maybe it would have to be me as a coach or something, but by the way, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to be a coach, but that's what I think could revolutionize the game because it happens in basketball and other sports already. Let's see. Okay, here's one. This is the last question I'm going to ask for this guy. I think everyone noticed you are probably the most productive journalist / expert in the field of CSGO. How do you manage to work so hard even when the conditions / external factors were against you or you were in a lazy mood? So I've touched on this in the past. Basically, as well as coming up with ideas, I have also developed many mediums through which to express the ideas, much more than I know of any other journalist in esports. Like, first of all, I work in multiple games at once. Secondly, I do columns, which can be like 900 words on a topic. They can be a lot lighter. They can be just be one or two ideas expanded a little bit, or a story told that's topical. I do long historical articles if I want to go really deep into something and tell a big story and include a lot of information. I do Thorn Thoughts videos. They can be as short as 5 minutes. They could be as long as an hour and a half on a topic, depending on how much I want to talk about it. I do talk shows where I can bring up an idea and work that through if it's not something I think is necessarily worthy of its own video, or there's too many topical points and I can't get through them all in videos. I do interviews with people if I want to discuss something in a particular sense. I do analysis desk. So I've got all these ways to get through different aspects of my work. And the key detail is I've worked on them so much that I get paid for every single one of these different components to differing degrees based on how much they can make me. So as a result, what I'm doing all day long is not anything to do with thinking about that. First things first, I'm just managing my own energy level. How much sleep have I had? What food have I had? What's my current state, etc. I have a really good sense from all these years of doing it of what energy level I've got at the moment for what I can do and how much I've kind of got left in the tank for that day without doing something like meditate or work out or eat some food or have a nap or something. So I'm managing that, and then as I'm doing that over the day, I'm figuring out, right, I could probably do a video here, maybe start work on something there. And then here's a key thing. When I have not much energy or don't feel like I'm in the mood where I want to be on camera, etc., but I have some ideas I want to work out still, sometimes I just take notes, or I have a little session where I bounce ideas off myself, or I talk to someone about something, or I do some research for an article, because research, a lot of it's just simple gathering data, and then you're going to assess the patterns as you write the thing. So I do a lot of research. So what I've done is found a way to be productive in all different areas. It's not that I just took one thing I did and was like, right, do that all day long, 15 hours a day. Like, I think that's a negative attitude to have, actually. I've found a way to make life fun in that particular sense, get these ideas, and then express them through different mediums, and be willing to let an idea that might have been a good idea that you could have done as an article, but you haven't got it all quite there, and there's not enough time, and you want to get it out there in some sense, and sometimes be willing to just let that one go for now. And know if it's a good enough idea, one day maybe you will have a chance to write it as a full piece, but for now, we're just going to put it out as a simple video. Because, by the way, the idea that like I'm not in a lazy mood, like it's true, I'm probably the most productive person in the history of esports. But you know what? I'm probably also the laziest person in the history of esports. But there's a key detail, okay? There was a great quote by another prolific guy and a fantastic, incredibly hardworking person called Orson Welles, who's one of the best directors of all time from Hollywood. And he actually had a quote where he said, like, he's very lazy, and he's the sort of person where if he stopped working, he would just disappear into a hammock somewhere and you'd have never heard from him again. And his point was, you just make yourself keep doing stuff, and that's what means that you don't become mega lazy. You don't sit around going, oh, I'm so lazy, blah, blah, blah. What I think laziness is, in general, is a natural reaction to the fact that on some level you don't want to do what you're doing right now. So the key detail is, sure, this is a lot easier said than done, but I was in this position, is right now, I would say, find something you do want to do that the end result could have some value, either to yourself to improve you, could have some value maybe even in what you need doing overall. Like, for example, you got something you don't want to write right now, you feel really lazy, maybe do some research that'll make it easier when you come to write it. Or find something totally different that at the moment doesn't help you in any way, but in the future, one day you might be able to be good at, or it might be satisfying enough that it either takes your time up and makes you feel productive, or you could even make money and have a job doing so. So what a key secret is, if on some level you enjoy what you're doing, you will want to do it. It will impel you to do it. You will want to produce that finished product. You will want to be productive, etc. And eventually, if you do a good enough job, you will seem like an incredibly productive, incredibly hardworking person with a great work ethic, which at this point in time, I mean, on another level, I am. Like, I can go 9 hours researching stuff. I can look into mad details of something just to make one line about a pick band thing that no one will ever fully appreciate at what maniacal level I went to researching that or watching the games. But I've made it fun. So that even these aspects, sure, for someone else that isn't fun. That's why that guy shouldn't do that. But I've managed to, that become fun for me. That is, in fact, actually sitting, listening to a drum and bass mix on ASMR video, having a drink, and like not a drink of alcohol, just drinking some soda or water or whatever, and being on my computer and doing research, I find incredibly relaxing. Right? A lot of fun. I know I'm actually setting myself up in a very low level way for success in the future. I'm building up things that I'm going to get ideas from. So I enjoy doing that. So being in a lazy mood is not a concern for me because I found a way to shift my life. And also you notice now, I don't take offers. I have offers all the time that are for very good money and for really like prestigious positions and responsibility and big titles, and you would get a lot of respect and all these things. But if they're not within the wheelhouse of the things I want to do, I don't take them. I just make sure that all my opportunities are within the wheelhouse of what I want to do, and therefore I'm able to be productive doing it. So, okay, this is a question from a guy called Gooch Brews. Hey Thorin, do you think it's time for Valve to revert the AWP nerf? I know the AWP isn't underpowered or anything, but for $4,750 with a 100 kill reward, I seriously think it's underpowered or anything. Oh no, wait a second. I seriously think its scoped movement speed was perfect before. It wouldn't be as effective as it used to be, even if it got reverted, because tagging has been heavily buffed since the AWP nerf, so aggressive AWPers can't hide behind corners as easily as if they missed their first shot. And rifles recently got a tapping and bursting buff, so they can deal with AWPers at range with great ease. So should Valve revert the AWP nerf? I think they should revert it anyway. I thought it was just a lot better as it was. It's not like AWPers were dominating the game and every team had a super sick AWPer and it was just the AWPer top fragging all the time and taking over the whole match and you couldn't beat teams because their AWPers too godlike. That wasn't the case whatsoever. In fact, the best AWPer of all time was in his fucking prime going ham and his team could not win a tournament in Kenny S in Titan. So that's a joke. Meanwhile, the best team from his country, Envious, had Smiths as their primary AWPer and sometimes Shocks, neither of which were godlike AWPers, and they were the best team in France and they were winning majors and big events and constantly top 4 every event. And they were a famous team for 5 rifle and for buying CZs and winning against anything. So, I mean, the idea that, like, the AWP was some mega overpowered thing anyway was a fucking joke. I've gone over it a million times. I had a video about the AWP nerf. But I even think the points you make here about how tagging would allow you to fuck with AWPers more and about how tapping and bursting being buffed also would let you neutralize them. I agree with that as well. So, as a result, I say put the AWP back to its old strength and give AWPers a fucking chance to get in the game because there already weren't that many super sick AWPers. And it's no coincidence that right now, here's the thing, every other role in the game, every other type of player, try and list the top 10 at that role or type of player or whatever. Now try listing the top 10 AWPers. You can't even get 4 or 5 names in without starting to list people who aren't even vaguely informed right now, but historically were great AWPers and still use the role. And then after 4 or 5 names, you start listing people off who are barely even star players, who barely even themselves can use it all the time and have any sort of impact. It gets really sad. So now it's not that AWPers dominated before and they've neutralized it and made it fair now. They've gone the other way. They've ruined AWPers completely. It's only because the AWP is always going to be a very good tactical weapon, that, and also you get the advantage of sight, that it will always be used. There's times, I think, actually, where people make the mistake of buying the AWP on the pro level and it ruins their economy as a result, and they'd have been better off sometimes not doing that. But in general, teams always think of that mindset, we're going to win this round. So they don't think in the same way that I do in that particular sense, and don't do that by the numbers. So yes, they should revert the AWP nerf. That's incredibly important. I've brought it up every time it was ever asked about me. Every time anyone ever sold me, Valve did a good game, I go, yeah, what about the AWP though? See? So, Yaha ALC, hey Thorin, I watch Rocket League and Counter-Strike with Dota, LOL and Smash piquing my interest from time to time. 2-point question, big picture type of thing. couldn't think of a simple one-liner for you to answer. With Dota League and CSGO as the reigning kings in esports, how and why do other games, such as my beloved Rocket League, end up sitting with the big boys in esports? I initially thought it had to be organically grown with some support from publisher, as with Counter-Strike and its major system. But with League of Legends and Overwatch artificially creating their competitive scenes and LOL having success, Overwatch having potential, I began wondering if it poses any detriment to the success of the scene. In Rocket League, Psyonix/Twitch are putting more and more money into their RLCS, and it has already attracted major orgs such as G2, NRG and Flipside. Is this just a more radical version of the aforementioned support, or is this directly them trying to make an esport? First of all, there's a lot of characterizations here I wouldn't agree with, so I'm going to have to pick those apart initially. So when he says, like, he initially thought you had to organically grow the game with support from the publisher. No, here's the thing. First and foremost, I mean, this addresses, I talked about this before, but there's a video I did about why Quake won't be the #1 game. This talks about a lot of these issues. One of the first ways you can make an esport have a chance to be big is if it organically grows in terms of player base. If enough people play it, then you've got a chance that even a small fraction of that converted into viewers is enough to make it a viable esports game. So that's going to mean there's a lot of grassroots tournaments run for it, etc. If there's enough people playing Rocket League, it'll have an initial chance at that. I don't know what the numbers are for this particular game. I would speculate not high enough. Or if there are people playing it, then maybe people like to play it only casually. And it's not as much fun to play professionally, for example. Like games like Counter-Strike, StarCraft 2 are actually more fun, like more satisfying to play professionally than for fun, actually. I don't think StarCraft 2 is a very good casual game at all. So in this sense, is Rocket League actually suited for that? Do people want to dedicate themselves in that way? Do people even want to be a part of tournaments like that? Then add in, after that point in time, if it's then got enough player base and then people are running tournaments in it and there's enough pro players, now you've got the question, do people want to watch it who are even players of that game? Forget people who are outsiders. The people who play the game casually want to watch it. Now, funnily enough, League of Legends, not that many people actually want to watch it. They say they've got 100 million active accounts, and yet the viewer peak for any tournament ever was Season 5 Worlds, I think, at like 14 million. So actually not that many people who play League of Legends casually want to watch the game. But because they've got 100 million, their overall objective number compared to all the others, relative, is massive, but not relative to their whole player base. If Rocket League had 100 million people playing it, I've no doubt it could have enough people watching, enough tournaments, and it would definitely be supported in that sense. You're also right that the developer support's big, because developers can kickstart the tournament circuit, which is what League of Legends did. Now, it is the case that there is a small artificial aspect to League of Legends, which is apparently they did do some pretty shady shit with some companies, as we all know about the whole Gamergate thing. This is kind of tied into that, but never been brought up because it was years before, where essentially they did some fuckery behind the scenes to get positive reviews, positive press, in a way that they naturally wouldn't have gotten. That's what Riot Games did to help boost their game's exposure. Now, with that said, I don't think at all that League of Legends actually was artificially made, because it had such a massive player base that if you created a tournament circuit, people would watch it and people would be interested and it would grow in that sense. It was artificial in as much as League of Legends actually paid the prize money for some of its early tournaments in an era when people like StarCraft 2 weren't paying the prize money. Like people like ESL or DreamHack had to come up with the prize money from their sponsors to run a game in that. So it's true, as a developer, Riot were one of the first to really support their game in that sense. So that's sort of artificial, but at the same time, they had good reason to do that, and that actually was just allowing them an opportunity for where they already had a chance to be successful because of what else they had, which is the grassroots element of the game. So I don't think they were all just artificial in that particular sense. Let me think, what else was it? And he says the same about Overwatch. Mate, Overwatch has loads of people playing it. Again, they have fulfilled the grassroots element completely without any artificial shit going on there. So I think you're being a bit unfair if you try and suggest that like Rocket League somehow is better than that or doesn't have that and doesn't have the art, and that these just had an artificial boost. Not really. They just had the initial conditions to be very successful, and then the developers did some of the things that could allow them to then be successful. It's true there is an artificial element in terms of doing tournaments, because a tournament organizer has to be into the game, has to think the game has potential, has to be willing to take a risk on the game. That's all true. Now, personally, I don't know if Rocket League can be that successful myself. I don't play it myself. I don't watch it, obviously. I don't watch a lot of esports games, so I can't comment on whether it could or couldn't. I mean, I was shocked that CSGO got as big as it did. Definitely shocked at League of Legends. Let me think. Initially with Overwatch, I thought that'd probably only really be a casual game. So as that starts to get some traction, I think that's kind of impressing me. Now, in terms of the part where you say like major orgs, like G2, NRG, Flipside, like I only consider G2 a major org out of those. Like NRG's all right. They have the money, but they don't really have any of the games that are big enough. So I think they're taking a flyer on many games to try and get some good teams. And Flipside is not a big org. They're just like a tier 2, tier 3 org at the moment. So I don't think there's actually enough orgs you've even listed there. Like where's your Fnatic? Where's SK? Where's Cloud9? Where's TSM? Where's Optic? Where's FaZe? Where are all these teams? These are massive orgs, mate. So if they're not involved, I think that in itself tells that they don't believe in the game. They don't think there's any potential. They don't care about it, and they don't want to put teams in it, and they don't think that they're going to make money from it and get exposure enough. So that would be a concern right there for me if I were you. In terms of that whole making esport, I agree. You do make an esport to a degree, but you have to have a lot of the conditions there if it's going to happen anyway. Like you can't just force any. Like I'll give you a quick example. The CPL, which was the biggest major at the time, the Cyber Athlete Professional League, made a whole world tour with like 10 stops and 150k first place prize money for the final stop, and I think it was like 50k first place. No, maybe it was like 20k first place for each stop. Something like that. And 10 stops, like 9 of them were all around the world. They made this insane world tour for a game called Painkiller, which had some developer support, but wasn't a big game casually. And you know what? They ran the whole tour. They gave out the money. Some of it apparently never got there, but they had this massive tour, the biggest tour ever in esports at the time. And they tried to artificially make a game, and people just watched it a little bit, and people didn't play the game much, and they couldn't force it to be an esport game in that sense. So I think it's kind of a bit sour grapes when you try and imply that people just created these esports out of nowhere. Killer Yannick OO. Would you ever consider becoming an analyst in another esport/sport? Yes, but I would be an analyst less in the sense of like raw analysis like I try to do in CSGO, and more in kind of the showmanship aspect and the historical, like telling the context of the players and how important this match is and what it means, and here's an interesting point, and letting other people springboard off that, or playing the villain role. Like I would do that in many other games. I would probably do it in most of them that I'm interested in, actually. Obvious example being League of Legends. If I'd ever been asked by, obviously like IEM was kind of off the table at the time, but if it had been IEM or, God forbid, luckily it's never happened, we've never even had to think about crossing this bridge, but Riot Games asked me to do one of their big events, I'd have probably considered giving it a try. I don't know if it'd work, I don't even know if I'd vibe with the people I'd work with there or the audience, but I'd have given it a try, certainly. But I'd have done it more as a pundit. And anyone who thinks that being on those desks is only about analysis, again, it's about a massive amount of technical skill, and also about playing a role within a team, which is all the people on the desk. It's not about having the best analysis in the world. There's many people who are amazing at analysis and don't do well on those desks, and in fact people don't want to listen to them on those desks. So I certainly would have done it for these games. After doing so much Summoning Insight, it's pretty obvious I could play a semi-Summoning Insight pundit type role on a League of Legends desk, and I would mainly be there for banter, making the historical context, and I would kind of springboard other people into making the analysis points and work with them in that sense. So I could certainly be an analyst in that sense. I've mainly done it for CSGO, because in CSGO, there are more events than I can do. I have to turn down so many, and I'm going to have to turn down more in the future, because I want to do mainly the big events and stop spending so much time away from home. I want to spend more time at home doing the work I like. So as a result, I'm going to be an analyst less in CSGO. So I don't really know it makes too much sense to like branch into like 3 or 4 games. But an obvious one that at the moment I'm gradually heading into is Overwatch. I'm going to see how that goes with the talk show I'm going to do in Monte Cristo soon. And then I'll see how that goes. If I enjoy that, maybe I'll do an analyst role in that game. We'll have to see. They've got to bring that fucking long paper though. Let's see. Let's see here. Okay, Arvid Johansson. If someone wants to be a pro player, what style would there be a bigger interest of picking up? What type of player do you think there is none of or little or too little of? Right. Again, he hasn't listed what actual game this is, but since, the roles are already set in League of Legends and you just play the one that you play, I would assume, and since he has a Swedish name, he's talking about CSGO here. So this isn't just for Europeans, this is for North Americans as well. I would say that unless you have unreal aim and fantastic mechanical skill and incredible confidence in your skills, which, by the way, if you have all those things, you should already be at a semi-pro level at least. Unless you have all those things, what you should work on right now is becoming a really diligent in-game leader who learns how to use people and work on tactics, or you should work on becoming a support player who can team play, who can help other people succeed and fill in the gaps around the team. These are incredibly valuable things that even top teams still lack sometimes. And if you got to a good enough level with polished skills as well, you could become a pro player most certainly off this. This is something that what will happen is you'll be in teams where outside people won't know how good you are, but people in your team will rave about you and will love you because how you help them succeed and how you play around them and how important they know you are to the success of the team. Now, not only is that a great piece of advice for CS in general, but it's incredibly important in NA. If you do that in NA and you get good enough at that, you can have a career for a long time. Just as in basketball, the thing that will let you have a 20-year career, even if you're not a star player level talent, is like being able to hit an open shot, play a little bit of defense, and hustling for rebounds. If you can do any of those three things, even just one of them, you can have a career on a bench somewhere for life in the NBA until you get injured and have to retire. Now, obviously, you have to be good enough to be at a pro level, and that's my point. But better to do that than be the 20th best shooting guard in the NBA, because that will not get you a career and that will not last you long in the NBA. So likewise, I would go for the roles that aren't the sexy ones, that people don't want to do, that people don't think's fun. Because what you're going to have to do is reset your filters in your mind so that fun for you becomes helping that guy succeed, letting him carry the game, and therefore you winning the game, not you having fun and getting all the kills and doing that. So as a result, that's why most people aren't doing these roles. And that's why, by the way, someone like Zipnix probably will have a career in Astralis his whole career, no matter how badly he ever plays in terms of form. Because he has a star player's skill set, but the mentality of this kind of a support player, and people always want to play with him as a result. And when he's then in form, he can dominate from the support position. Okay, let's see here. Right, what Danish/Swedish super team would you build, and why would you pick the players? Would like to hear the lineups of 2 teams, 1 full Danish and 1 full Swedish. Ah, lordy. Right, well, I can do videos on these myself and earn money off that, mate. So I'm just going to do a simple version for each that's quick, impromptu, just based on what I'm thinking right now. So in general, when I make these teams, I try to make them a real team that would roughly fill out some of the roles or would fit together. Okay, so we'll start with the Swedish one. And it needs to be a super team, right? Which does, by the way, unfortunately, some people think super team means best at every position. No, I don't think that's the case, and definitely not the best players. So obviously, contracts are nothing to me. I can pick who I want. So right now, I think who I would pick is, I would pick, let me think. Okay, I'm just going to go on current form right today. So I would start off and I would pick Dennis and Flusher, because they are the 2 best Swedish players at the moment right now. And Dennis, I mean, he's going to be my big fragger overall. He's going to be one of my skill positions. Flusher is going to be like semi-lurk. I mean, he shifts that up a bit now from what he used to do back in the day, but he's obviously like quite a... It's not. I don't think he's like an intelligent player to the degree people do. I think it's more like he's an incredibly intuitive player who reads the game and kind of like listens to the language of the games. I think he's very good at that. So I'll take him for that, and he has a very good confidence in himself. So I'll take those 2 as my basis, and then I will put in... let me think. Who do I want as my in-game leader for this? Fuck it. I'll put in Pronax for this, so I'll have him as my in-game leader. So there's 3 of my players. I need 2 more players. And as my 2 other players, I think I will take... See, the problem is, on current form, I can't take someone like Crims. He's just playing so appallingly. So as my other 2 players, I will take Moddy, and I'll put him mainly as a lurker. His fragging has been really good these last few months. He is Swedish, remember. I'm going to put him in there, and then I'm going to put in... See, at the moment, Olofmeister's form is not good enough, despite the fact he's a good hybrid AWPer. See, in this team, I could put Olofmeister in. I could put Twist in. I think I'll go with Forrest now. Forrest has enough raw skill that he can be another skill position. I think this would be a pretty good team right now. This is based on today's form, and if I had to make a team tomorrow to have a really good chance from Sweden, I think this could be a really good team overall. Now, in terms of the Danish one, again, the Danish one I have almost unlimited options. There's so many players in all these teams, so I'll go with a quite simple run for this one, okay? So I'll have MSL as my in-game leader. I think he's got a lot of problems with his individual game. I still think he makes crazy decisions, but I'll give him credit. The current Dignitas, he has actually made it into one of the only teams I've ever seen who can play almost every map and can really abuse the map pool. And so I think as long as his team doesn't break up soon, he's going to do a lot of big things. So I'll take MSL as my tactical in-game leader. I'll put in... Okay, so my star players for this team, I'm going to go with a 3-man core of really skilled players. I'm going to go with Device. He is the best player in Denmark. For me, always has been. Has amazing all-round skill set, but in general, isn't going to be super aggressive. He's more of the passive, rack up kills consistently type player. So he's going to provide a base of numbers. So I want him to be partnered with someone who's aggressive and really skilled. So for that position... I'm going to pick 2 other players to fulfill that at all times, because they're going to take turns depending on the game. And I'm going to pick Config and AZ. AZ has fantastic skill level. He just hasn't been able to show because he doesn't even play in a fucking Danish team. Still a really skilled player, though. And then I'm going to put in Config, because I think just in terms of like aggression and raw skills, like sure he's up and down, but he's very good. So you have them with Device, it's going to be monster. And now I've got MSL, so now I need a 5th player, right? So I need a player now that can play like a little bit more the supportive end of the equation. So, I mean, at the moment, maybe people would say Zipnix. I think his form hasn't been that great recently, but he does do a lot for the team. Or who else could I go with? Let me think. Zipnix. Is there anyone else that actually warrants being in there? I think I'll go with Zipnix just because he just has to do his job. He doesn't even have to frag in this team, basically. I think that's a pretty solid team right there. Again, off current form, and I think they could do a lot of damage. Okay, Ocho Cinco Legend, which is that guy who makes all those like songs. I think it's Polish. I think so from his name anyway. It has like a bunch of Z's in it. Said, Thorin, can you be my teacher in the school, please? Now, he means that as a joke, but actually, I think teaching is something that, to some degree, I probably do in some of my videos, the way I talk. And actually, I think that's one of the reasons why I have considered coaching at times. And in the future, if there was some kind of option, I probably would do teaching. Because in life, I think you have to have a relationship with information and how you get information and pass it on. That actually, all of it transforms you and takes you to a higher level. So you have to have like a mentor who you take information from or inspiration from. You have to have like a rival who you battle with to get better. You have to have a friend who you get better with together. You have to have the person you pass knowledge on to. And what's funny is when you're taking the knowledge from the mentor, you're thinking, wow, this guy's such a great guy, so altruistic. What's he gaining from this? Well, in explaining it to you, he's actually figuring out that he knows it all. Or he's figuring out how to explain something or connecting points together he hadn't thought of, or condensing it and making it simpler and seeing if he really does know the topic. Likewise, when you then start training someone, you will start doing that. So in that sense, just as I've had many people I've learned things from, people I've battled with, people I've gotten better with, and that we've got to, I'm trying to imbue what I know and try and see if it makes sense and try and get it out there and articulate. So it helps me in that sense. So actually, I think being a teacher is quite a valuable skill to have if you're someone who works with information and ideas. Okay, so Jojo Prince, how do you feel about roster changes? Do you think teams should try to stick together and perhaps change roles like Virtus Pro? Or perhaps change something else other than choosing what could be called the easy way by changing players? What is the impact on bringing a whole new player into in your team when you have to build up some chemistry and have to learn how to play off each other instead of changing nothing when you already have that chemistry, etc.? Of course, some cases are more obvious, like personality problems. Like, first of all, there's all these assumptions built into this that I have to just unpick immediately that are really problematic. Like when he says there, how do I feel about roster moves? Well, roster moves have accounted for 99.9999 recurring percent of drastic improvements in teams in the history of sports and competitive disciplines. Roster moves are the solution. Now, they can be the easy way out in as much as you didn't give something enough time, or you refused to let a player play his position, or people didn't get along. That can be the easy way out, but it's not really the easy way out. It's actually still an incredibly difficult, because if everyone's doing roster moves as they do in this scenario and improving, that means you have to make the right roster move. The wrong roster move fucks you. It's not easy to do that. And so that's a problem in itself right there. Now, the idea that they can just stick together and change different roles like Virtus Pro, well, I mean, the best example ever of that, the huge outlier, is Virtus Pro, right? Hasn't even worked for Virtus Pro all the time. It's worked for them enough because they've given it like 3 years and they've had periods of success. And by the way, they've only now just become the number one team in the world. So you could make a case that in the past, maybe they could have done a roster move that could have made them the best in the world for 6 months at some point in time. Maybe it would have even made them better. Now they've gone a totally different route and they've specialized in a very unique way, partly because of the history of Taz and Neo doing that in 1.6, where they're valuing different things like special team play and a chemistry that still exists to some degree and people knowing what their job is and not having to communicate as much as other teams necessarily. They're valuing that over like raw skill in the moment. Okay, that's just a different mentality to the game, and how it's not that one's better or other. Each of them will have differing types of success and have different win conditions overall. So I don't think every team can do that. Like, for example, when he says here, he contrasts bringing in a new team where you have to build the chemistry versus changing nothing when you already have that chemistry. Like, those are two extreme conditions. That's not the case for most teams. Most teams, the reason they make a roster move is they don't have the chemistry. And they've tried to build it up and work on it, but it can't get past a certain point. I think most teams in history, here's another principle, are usually at nearly their best level where that lineup in its first 3 events. Go back in history and look at it. That exact lineup in its first 3 lands usually shows at least one of the lands what it's capable of and the level it can go to. If it hasn't by then, it's very rare that you can somehow build chemistry, because actually chemistry to some degree should be a function of which players, what types of players and what their mentality is like. So some of it will be natural, it will be instant, and then you try and enhance that and iron out a few crinkles. You can't get people who don't fit together whatsoever and just blang them and they have no chemistry and then build it up to the level of like Virtus Pro or 2014 NIP or Fnatic 2050. You can't do that. It will never happen for you. Those teams already had that initial chemistry, already had that initial success, already got all these things initially going. Seriously, go back and look at the history of any of these teams and look in the first 3 events, like I say. So I don't think it's as simple as it's literally a case-by-case example, but as a general rule, I don't think people actually do roster moves enough. Now, that'll sound weird because some people do really stupid roster moves when it could have still worked out. But my point is, the only time you keep a roster together when it's not winning and when everything doesn't look that great and people are out of form, the only time you should keep it together is when it has been proven in the past to win and it hasn't yet properly proven it can't win. So, for example, G2 should keep their lineup together right now because it's still fantastic and has not proven that it can't win. It still could be very successful and is from event to event. It still has players that all work together. NIP, I agreed with them not removing Fifth Line until they really did bomb the shit out of those last 2 months really terribly. Fnatic, I'm glad they kept the lineup together as long as they could. They won an extra major by doing so and were very, very good. Even the latest Fnatic lineup, which never won the major, but still placed top 4, made finals. They waited until really the end and they were like, right, we're clearly not going to win a major or a massive tournament anymore. That's when you do it. When you really see that at that point there is a gap in chemistry or skills or form or role, and that's when the roster move helps you. That's the better way to do it. But I think a lot of teams, famous examples like Mouse, Spots, Next, etc., I don't think they pull the trigger early enough. You can see from very early on that these teams don't have it. They're not going to get it. They don't have the skill. They don't have the form of the players. They don't have the chemistry. They don't have the right roles in the team. They have almost everything wrong, and yet they keep going because guys. I'm not blaming this guy directly, but fans give them this ridiculous mentality that history and facts do not prove out, which is that you got to just stick with it and work through your problems and all that sort of thing. By the way, just as a general point, I'll apply this to life. I think people in the past used to stay in marriages too long because they had this notion that you had to and that it was sacred union and all that stuff, and you got to just work on your problems. If your problems are that irrevocable that you have to spend years working on them and you're still having horrible fights and you're making each other's lives a nightmare, at that point, as horrible as it might seem, you should break up. You should find people who suit you and that it's actually enjoyable and it's fun and it's easier to get along and to want to be together and you have this chemistry in that sense. You shouldn't just force it to work no matter what because that will actually ruin everyone's life in that scenario. So in the same sense, it's how relationships work in general. Okay. So a guy called YouTube Newbie actually says some pretty stupid stuff, but then at the end, I mean, in general, I don't answer questions that aren't polite. At the end, he just says, any career regrets? Not really. Like, I always say this, whenever everyone's trying to like, you are a piece of shit and toxic and one of the worst people to ever be in esports, I always just say, try and write out a list of all my crimes, all the worst things I've ever done. So here's what I did. I made a reference to someone's personality, comparing him to the personality of a fictional primate. Therefore, people said that I said he in person was an actual monkey and his race was a monkey. Never said any of that. That's number one crime. Number two crime, said I think Poland's kind of a pretty shit country, like it has a lot of problems with it. I even admitted quite frustrated at the time I did that, but I mean, stand by most of what I said there. And the big mistake with that, which, I mean, this goes without saying, is you don't say that, like, just before you're about to go there. You can say it if you don't ever plan on going there, fine. But you don't say that before you're about to go there and work there in front of a crowd from that country. That's all absolutely fine. So that's a regret in that sense. Like, I obviously shouldn't have done that in that respect. I could have those opinions, I could say those opinions, could do it at a different time. But don't do it if you're then going to go and work there the next day. That makes no sense. That's a career regret to some degree. The other one isn't, by the way. It's an absolutely perfectly legit metaphor that I gave. And that's it, basically. I mean, I've never publicly lied to or about anyone knowingly, never stolen money from anyone, never actually ruined anyone's career in any tangible way, made some jokes about people, made some mean insults to people I don't like and who have fucked with me over my life and my career in ridiculous manners that fans of theirs don't know and therefore don't have any clue about. That's about it, really. That's about all that's ever happened. So not really a whole lot to regret there, right? I've just lived my life, tried to do a good job, have fun with it, keep things going, be productive, etc. What really would there be to regret? I think probably the only thing I regret is when I worked for companies in the past. Sometimes in the past, it's not that I ever told the line, I just didn't always speak out on certain topics earlier in the day. And funny enough, this is what people don't like now, that I speak out on things all the time. But there's times in the past where because of things like job security, I just thought to myself, like, you know, what would it benefit me to speak out there? Whereas now it's more like, do I think there's value in what I'm going to say? Do I think it's important? And if there is, I don't think about stuff like job security. And I've got my life in a position where job security exists because I've never put myself on that crutch of I have to not say the wrong thing or this person find me. That can't happen. I'm hired by like 10 different people at this point in time. If one drops out, I've got 9 others. And I've always got other people knocking on the door to come in. So I can pick the people that are willing to be part of this and want to be associated with my brand in a way companies in the past were. So in that sense, one thing I would say is a career regret actually, is when I was at On Gamers, when they asked me to issue like an apology about Reginald saying that it was nothing to do with his appearance. Because as I mentioned, first of all, it was the actual point was obviously about the way he behaves. It was all about his personality. But the joke with a wink and a nudge was about the fact that he's ugly and in no way because of his race, just because of he is ugly. That's the joke. It's an insult. He is ugly. built into a perfectly valid point. So I do regret that I issued a statement on that where I wasn't like equivocal about that. I was kind of like, maybe I wasn't unequivocal. I wasn't unequivocal about specifically what I meant there. I was too vague, and then I think I left the door open for people to interpret it more based on my actual comments that I made in like on Gamers Apology. That was probably one rare career regret, but it's not really, it doesn't keep me up at night. It's something I think about. I've had to think about it right now to come up with this fucking answer for this question, but in general, no, not really that many career regrets. I mean, lots of times where I went the wrong path, or I did something that didn't really work out, or it seemed like a negative thing, it actually in the end, because I was trying to be true to myself at most times and be reflective and improve, it got me to a better place later on. So it's hard to really regret that ultimately. I wanted to learn those lessons, even if sometimes they were harder lessons than you might necessarily have liked to have learned. So, let's see. Okay, here's a question where I'm going to skip a lot of it. I'm just going to get to this line here. You have built up your career by putting in countless long hours of hard work in order to get where you are today. I mean, it's kind of a bit redundant how you started into that sentence, but okay. Was there anyone that inspired you to work as hard as you do in order to put in that extra hour? Or was it something you decided for yourself in order to be successful? Now, first of all, even if you're inspired, the idea that like just someone inspiring you then makes you like execute all of that is nonsense. People get inspired all the time. People can watch like a Tom Hanks movie now, a Russell Crowe movie. They'll feel inspired at the end of the movie. Oh, I wish I could do that. And they'll never do anything with it. They'll anticipate it'll be gone tomorrow, and that's it. The actual carrying it out and changing your life is 99.999% recurring of the deal. Doesn't matter that the tiny little inspiration happened. Even though that might seem like the significant thing that turns it for you. You have to then actually do it anyway. So you have to decide for yourself to be successful and to do something anyway. Now, I wouldn't say I decided to be successful. I decided to try and improve and to get better at things and to do things I want to do and gain the skills that I needed to do those things. So what I will say is, in terms of people who inspired me to work hard, so two people who actually stand out immediately would be Kobe Bryant, the basketball player, all-time great shooting guard for the LA Lakers, and Tupac Shakur, the rapper. And part of that is because at the time when I really, really dedicated myself a lot to working on my craft and trying to get good at new things and putting in mad amounts of hours that were way more than my peers did on some of these topics, to the extent that part of the reason I know all the history of some of these things is I've gone over them a bazillion times and studied them as though like I was putting my whole life into this one player's career. Part of why I did all that, or part of my inspiration, was I looked at how these guys worked on things. And I saw that, like, for example, Kobe Bryant was already the best player in the NBA in 2006. He was a fantastic player, could score any time as he wanted. He was at the perfect sweet spot of physical prime and team built around him and raw skill and, like, technical ability and honing. You know what? From then onwards, he probably did more work in the second half of his career than he had in the first half of his career to get even better, to harness itself even more, to work, to improve in other areas even more. And I thought, fuck, if a guy that good is still working all the time and he's still trying to improve and he's still putting all his mentality into that, like, I've got to try and get that mentality, you know. Like, whether I can do it, I don't know, but I've got to try and get that mentality. And that's one of the reasons why I actually used to space out watching some of the basketball games between when I was doing work. So I'd watch the basketball game, I think, fuck yeah, look how all you did there. And then I'd do some work, and this would be a way every now and then I could like top myself up. Another thing is Tupac Shakur, because if you know anything about him, the reason why there's all this music that's like unreleased and so many tracks is not because he was around a long time. He actually lived a fairly short life in terms of his career and died after only a few years out there. But he had an insane work ethic, and he had that work ethic that kind of is the kind of thing that inspires like the Thorn Thoughts thing, where some of them are just ideas he's putting down, he's just trying stuff, and he's willing to make mistakes here, and then others he's working on his craft, he's been really dedicated, he's putting in so much stuff that doesn't matter if some of them don't hit and some of them don't work. There's going to be so much quality stuff there, and you're going to inspire the people around you to want to be more like that and to do more work themselves, and that's something that inspired me in that sense. Then also there's a fictional character that I've always thought was pretty cool, which is the character from the movie Rudy, which came out in 1993. I think it was like a straight-to-video or home movie video. It has Sean Astin as this guy who wants to be a football player. And what's funny is the general theme of the video, no one should apply to their life. Like, if you're someone who has no talent at a particular sport, if you spend your whole life and your only goal is to actually like do something in terms of like tangible success within that sport, you will have a terrible life. It won't work out like this movie for you. But if you're someone who just wants to be a part of something, or wants to be better, or wants to be better than you are, or develop your human potential, then yes, you actually can be that. You can work on it. And there was a great thought I had when I was watching that movie, and I've watched it many, many times, is I just thought to myself, this guy has next to no talent. This guy is fucking no reason he should succeed. watching the movie, he should quit. And by the way, it is fiction, remember. It's a myth. It's kind of the idea of like a lie that tells you truth about life. But as I was watching it, I thought to myself, what would actually happen if I worked that hard? What would happen if I applied myself like that and did the things I wanted to do and didn't necessarily like just focus on success, just kept going and plugging away and was persistent? And so obviously I haven't been able to do it to that sort of a ridiculous degree, but you'll notice I've never given up and I've never just thrown in the towel and I've said, oh, I can't get better at this. I just keep going. And as a result, for all the people who are like, yeah, someone will come along and replace you and someone will not be toxic and will do us. You notice how that's like a recurring broken record of people saying that every year of my career for 15 years. And it never happens. And you know why? Because people are more talented that come along. Or people wanted to be better than me. Or people had the opportunities early on. They had the position and the advantage and they got to my level. And guess what? All those people faded away. They all quit the race. And so at the end, it doesn't matter that they were better than me. Or that they could have been better than me. Or that they were on the track to be better than me. Or that people liked them more than me. They quit the race. Therefore, they lose. I'm still going. So I might not be the best, but I'm the only one who's going to cross the finish line. So let's have a look. Fucking hell, there's so many questions here. I don't know if I can handle doing a part 3 though. This one's been so long already. Let's see. I'll try to skim for the best questions now. Let's have a look. Here's a quick one. JJOZ 1, or is that just JJOZ? Are you disappointed that SK claimed the title of best team in the world? He's talking about CSGO over here, by the way, whilst never beating the old Fnatic in a best of 3. No, because really, I mean, first of all, do you mean the old Fnatic as in the one with Dennis? I presume you do. First of all, I don't, because the old Fnatic with Dennis was never the scary old Fnatic at the beginning of that era, as soon as Olaf Meister got injured. There's a reason they never won a tournament after that, and didn't even make that many finals as well. At that point, that wasn't the super scary team. So if they could have beaten that super scary team and that had existed, yeah, it would be kind of a bit lame, I think, if somehow they magically had never beaten them in the final. But then again, I can't think of a world in which they could never have played them and yet have got to all these finals like SK have and won all these tournaments if that team had been that sick. And that's the problem. That Fnatic wasn't that great towards the end. It was just it was an elite team, but not a champion team towards the end. And so SK was better than them, and the fact that Fnatic couldn't get to ever play SK is because Fnatic wasn't good enough. It has nothing to do with SK. SK beat everyone in front of them, basically. So, in terms of the old Fnatic before that, now that's an interesting perspective. That's not what I think he means. If it had been the Pronax Fnatic, yeah, that would be cool if they could have if that had somehow stayed together and been really good, and then they'd have like actually beaten them and taken the crown directly from them. That would be cool, but that team doesn't exist anymore, and that team couldn't exist anymore again in the old Fnatic. They'd broken down, they weren't winning anymore, and therefore you had to have someone like an SK come along and take over. So, not really disappointing in that particular sense. It's just the way things go. The Stony 35. If you had to pick one based on best CS played, was the best CS series, any CS version, and CSGO. The problem with 1.6 is, for the first half of the game, we didn't have that many best of 3s. And also in 1.6, a lot of the historically remembered really sick best of 3s were games actually that it was just a map or one was like really tight overtime. The whole series usually wasn't that sick. So I'll say one, but unfortunately the VODs I don't think exist for it anymore. And you'd have to get a demo and watch on 1.6. But basically, it's Natus Vincere, Na'Vi versus Fnatic in the semi-final of IEM 5 Shanghai. So it would have been like, I think roughly like August maybe of 2011. It's an amazing 3-map series, really, really high-level Counter-Strike, 2 of the best teams of all time battling. Really nice one. Now in CSGO, I always say this, but it still holds to this day. I think you've got to go with Fnatic versus NIP at MLG X Games Aspen in January of 2015. Just an insane 3-map series, fantastic entertainment, really great star performances, lots of twists and turns, all-time best team of all time, battling like a core of the best team of all time at the time. Like, fantastic matchup. I think in terms of recent matchup, by the way, the first 2 maps of SKVP were pretty fire. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, this is I'm gonna have to make this quick again because I can't just like go super in depth on every question. How much of the average pro's ability to improve and perform do you believe comes from nature versus nurture? So then he goes here in terms of like he does the thing where like aliens invade Earth, and then they think StarCraft's the best game for esports for esports or showing what humans are capable of, and so they're gonna have an invasion when StarCraft 3 happens, and I have to pick a player who is gonna. Oh no, they're picking me. And I have an hour of video communication per week with an average StarCraft player in terms of skill and talent. If, with your help, the player is able to win the biggest StarCraft 3 tournament, so I'm helping this player win it, within 2 years they will spare planet Earth and reward me with Skrilla. What would you teach the player about during the 2-year journey and in which order? again, I'm not going to go super in depth on this. Like, I think basically the general gist would be I would put a lot of work in on the fundamentals. That would be like 50% of what we'd work on, and he would just master the fundamentals. We would put like 20% into mental resilience. And then the idea here is, how do you feel when you're nervous? Like, what do you feel like when you're not at your A game, and how can you actually compete at your C game and still feel like you have a chance? Don't ever give up just because the opponent's better than you is ahead in the game. Allow him to make chances, these sorts of mental things. I would then put like 20% into just how to scout opponents effectively. Don't just watch their recent game and do that. Look for tendencies. Try and figure out if the tendency matches to something that's a strength of yours. If not, don't put too much effort on, and don't try and just like anti-strat it. Just figure out ways that his tendencies will give you openings in the game, and know what time in the game you can win in terms of win conditions. And the last 10%, I would purely work on just giving a lot of theory, like coming up with crazy ideas and off-the-wall ideas and innovative ideas, and just saying, put the odd one of those into your game. I think that in general would be the skill set, by the way, for almost any level of player to be a potential world champion, but I think that would help this player become amazing. So this is like I can't tell if this is actually like a foreign person or a fucking Polish person, because this name sounds almost like Polish. I think it's Mac JJ. So you put, did Zix meet your expectations? Zix is the coach of CLG, by the way. Any expectations? In your opinion, did he manage to become the tactician type that you said could make him succeed as a coach? Yes, I think he did. Like, I actually think Zix is the best Western coach in League of Legends right now. If he hadn't choked so many times, I would say Prolly is, because I think Prolly's right up there as well. But unfortunately, he has shown a tendency to choke in big series. So I think Zix is the best right now. What he's able to get out of his players is amazing. I think he is the best tactician in game leader, and he's imbued that in his team. And also, he's got a great general in terms of Afrin to take that philosophy onto the Rift with him. And the only flaw I see in Zix right now is I think sometimes he has too much confidence in some of his players. Like, he's not harsh enough. He's not realistic enough about some of his players. And so I feel like he lets them get champions or puts them in champion disadvantages, thinking that, like, oh, I know from practice if I just give this guy confidence and I know that he could do this in scrims. Like, I think that's where he only falls down. Aside from that, I think he's the best. I think he's fantastic. He's humble in the right way, not like he just lies and pretends like, I have to be humble. Like, that's bullshit. It's not your personality. Don't do that. But he's a guy who legitimately seems like he wants to learn, improve. He's just looking for the best way to play. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he's gotten way more out of that team than anyone deserves to. Like, that team should not be as good as they are. They should be like the 5th best team in LCS. Yet somehow they're going deep in playoffs. They're doing work against international teams. They're beating Korean teams. This is incredible shit. That guy's a really good coach, as far as I can tell. Again, I'm not on the inside. Let's have a look. Durba Villas. Have you ever covered or considered covering fighting games in any way? If not, what prevents you from working or being interested in that scene? I get asked this all the time, because people say, like, if you like trash talk and being like legit and honest and real recognize real, then fighting games is a scene for you. Okay, that's good and all that, but first of all, fighting games to me isn't a massive esport. Like, there doesn't seem like massive amounts of people watching it or opportunity to make money or to do things great in it. So since I don't naturally have some draw to the game, it's never been a genre I've been super into, there's not a natural inkling that I should get involved in the game or a natural to get involved in the game. I'm also, my time is massively used up with all the games I'm already currently in. And so in terms of why I'm not working or interested, I mean, that's a bizarre question, because it's never been on my radar. It's not like I've chosen not to be involved in it. It's literally never been something that I had a reason to even think about. So just not for me, right? I mean, we'll see if one gets big one day and maybe I find some into it. Like, games like League of Legends, it's partly because they got huge that I started taking interest in saying, is there anything in this game to me? And then I discovered things I liked about them. Just the genre of fighting games never been that sick to me. It's not for me, so I'll leave it to other people. Let me see. Icicle, or my icicle, but spelt in some like next level thug manner, says, I always love hearing you paint a picture of teams and players with words, and I love Dota 2. Thus, my question is, what are some of your favourite Dota 2 lineups, and what made them so special? Right, so first and foremost, I'm in no way an expert about Dota 2. I just watch that game as a very casual viewer for fun, for the teams I like and the big games. So I certainly can't go deep on the strategy and how the team compositions work and all that sort of thing. But I will give you some of my favourites in Dota 2, like entertaining or just really cool to watch. So funnily enough, I actually think that one of the most entertaining teams to watch ever is actually one of the Na'Vi teams that wasn't a champion. It was the Na'Vi team from TI3. Now, this team, where they managed to, over the year, like keep track with Alliance, they were like the solid second team to Alliance's dominance, and then they made it second to this tournament, which by the way they probably shouldn't have done, and that's what I'm going to get to now. This team wasn't as good relative to the scene as the TI1 Na'Vi was, or some of the other Na'Vi squads they had. But what I loved about this Na'Vi team to watch is that they reminded me of Virtus.pro in CSGO. They're never out of a game. They always can find a way on pure grit and heart, and then just doing ballsy, decisive plays, even when players aren't in form and things aren't going well. I mean, the obvious example here is the game against fucking Tong Fu, where they were doing all the Podge Chen hooks, like the ridiculous ones to the fountain. Like, that's just baller to watch. That's fucking insane to watch. And so you always felt like this is going to be insane if it's a big tournament and they're playing someone, no matter what form the other person's in, no matter what players they have. So that's a really fun team to watch. In terms of my favourite team of all time, my favourite team of all time is actually the Team DK of 2014. I just think when you look at it, that's like one of the few examples of what's almost like a super team in terms of all the players there, and just a great mix of players from the Chinese and SEA region. That, like, what a fantastic team. And it's just a problem in Dota that, if you notice, it's nearly never the team that dominates the first part of the year, like League of Legends, by the way, that then dominates when TI comes around. You know, you kind of burn yourself out and the metagame evolves past you because you've helped it evolve to that point. So they were very, very good. Definitely one of the best teams of all time. And at the time, obviously, Burning was fucking God mode at that point in time. One of my favourite players of all time. An amazing carry player. And this was really, for me, when he was like... I mean, there might have been other times where people thought he was mega in Dota 1 or whatever. I didn't follow Dota 1. I think this guy was unreal at this point in time. Was just like, to me, probably the best player in the world. And then beyond that, rather than teams, I would say... by the way, the thing about DK was, first of all, they could extend the game as long as they wanted. They could win any type of game, basically. That's what was so insane. They could really dominate you from nearly all the positions. And they just actually... Somehow they got all these players that were very, very good. And so it felt like they had this mad momentum where they just snowball the fuck out of you. And they just, like, run all over you. And I think there's a good reason that so many people were scared to play that team and felt like they were so hard to put away. Let me see. Oh, now I'll just pick a few players through history that I always thought were really sick. So my favourite player in the history of Dota 2, actually, and if you know League of Legends, you'll maybe understand why this is actually Ferrari 430. And likewise, one of my favourite players in League of Legends is the player Froggen. And both mid players, both amazing at farming, both super consistent, both had years and years where they were really good, even when their teammates weren't so good. I mean, just a fantastic person at mastering the craft of League of Legends and always having champions he could play. Dota 2. Heroes that he can play. Obviously... I mean, in Dota 2, it hasn't been going very well from the last few years, but even up to like TI5, he still had it to some degree. He was still a very good player, still a carry, still consistent, still finding ways to battle. So again, just one of my all-time great players, insane longevity, just like Froggen. And my other player I'll just cite at this point in time, I've done Burning, I've done Ferrari 430. I'm just going to have to cite as a last player is Light of Heaven. Because in the early days of Dota 2, I didn't watch Dota 1, so I can't comment on that. In the early days of Dota 2, what a fucking godlike player this guy was. I mean, this is a guy who can play support and just be like the most impactful player in the whole game. I mean, people talk about Pylai Die now, he's definitely an incredible player, but this guy, Light of Heaven, was something else. And if it wasn't for being apparently such a weird guy and for some reason getting himself away from those Na'Vi teams and other top teams from the CIS region at the time, I just wonder what he could have accomplished in the next couple of years. I think that's really one of the big what ifs. And unfortunately, he strikes me as one of those guys who was apparently so burnt out from Dota 1 that for some reason when Dota 2 got huge, they kind of weren't that into it anymore and they just didn't go ham. So I think that's a shame because he was an absolutely incredible player, so versatile, and was someone who could dominate from like a support style position and style of play. So what an incredible player. Let's have a look. Liam, yes, whatever that means. Do you concede that it is incredibly funny in the grand scale of things that there's a bearded man on the internet who cares so much and devotes his life to video games and people throwing balls for a living and makes constant videos about them while we're on the thin crust of Earth on a magma ball flying through endless unthinkable void that's pummeling towards the heat death of the universe? Yes, but that's like not even the most funny or ridiculous aspect if you think about it. I mean, the most ridiculous aspect is the idea that like there's a kind of primate that can not only reflect on itself, but in modern society is so neurotic, I'm talking about humans here, that they're constantly wondering, who am I? Do I fit in? What am I? Is there a god controlling all of this? And then just by making small mouth noises which transmit vibrations out of their vocal cords can then on any level be understood by another one of these primates, who then not only think they understand them, even though there's often going to be differences between their dictionaries, but then will also think that in understanding them, they can then comprehend what is right, what is true, and what is like the only way something can be. And even worse, these fucking primates think they can understand time, the universe, the nature of being, epistemology, teleology, like what will happen in the future, how everyone should live, what is the correct thing to do here. They can solve every single problem. Like, that is the most ridiculous, funny thing in that sense. That's so irrational. That shows how removed humans are from what they actually seem to be as creatures. And also, the same human doesn't even acknowledge that it is an animal. It thinks it's so high above the animals because it can watch Seinfeld and do basic calculus and fix a wheel. Somehow that means the fact that it still has to like bend over to shit out, has to eat a bunch of food, usually not even good food, has to like copulate, is ashamed about these things, these basic animal things, and they just in denial of that. And I think one of the biggest areas and causes of suffering in the world is the denial that humans are part of the animal kingdom and have behavioral tendencies like animals. And if you look at that and you think about that and you not treat people like animals, because obviously I don't agree with animal abuse either, but at least consider them in the sense of how we model animal behavior, and it'd be a lot less suffering in the world, rather than this ridiculous conceit that when it was something more, that with this artificial halfway between the angel and the monkey, like just ridiculous. And that's what leads to a lot of problems, because we're all living a lie when we do that, and then wonder why it turns out that this politician here, he seemed like such a good man who was so righteous and noble. He was fucking gay at hookers. How could it be that my whole world is falling apart? What did you expect, mate? What did you expect? That's ridiculous. Stuff, that's his name. What do you think about the Finnish CS scene? Is there not enough talent, or why has there never been a successful Finnish CS team? He means in CSGO. Now, at the very beginning of CSGO, actually there was one. Like, I think it was at, like, Northland or something. Some tournament like that. Was it Northland? Let me think. Some tournament at the end of 2012, Curse EU, which was like Natu and Narsu and a bunch of these guys, was actually a pretty decent team, or maybe they were called Hawks at the time, and actually made like top 4 at an event that had like NIP there and did pretty well against NIP on a map. So at the beginning they were pretty decent. In CS history, there were plenty of really good Finnish teams, and even teams that, like, at one point in time in early 2007, Lurpus's Rockat /64, 69 and 28E team was the best in the world very briefly. Now, the problem with the Finnish scene is, first of all, you've got a scenario where they have to go and do the mandatory military service, and people just don't come back from that and become really good at CS. They don't dedicate themselves anymore. It kind of makes you into a man in some weird initiation fashion. So that fucks with their whole scene. Then you've got to add in, they've got no sponsors, no orgs there. So I don't think people have really given them enough chances. Also, they haven't really merited it at the moment. And then for some bizarre reason, people just don't seem to be going ham in CS in the way in CSGO that they used to be going when they were in other games. So I do find it a little bit saddening, actually. And especially in terms of like Finnish people in general. Here's the funny thing. Swedish people, it's like they put their faith in the team unit and they don't have to themselves be the star. And so they just put faith that if we just work together and we play together, we'll win as a team. Finnish people, unfortunately, have this mad pessimism, which the only country I've ever seen that matches it is Britain. And what they tend to do is just think, we'll probably just fuck it up at the end. We'll probably just fail in the end. It's just stupid, isn't it? Let's have a beer. Like, we fucked it all up. Like, is it any surprise? Oh, poor old us. It happened to us again. They have a really defeatist mentality like that that's really kind of like mad, and unfortunately seems to prevent you from being good in sports. Now, you'll notice the Finns that tend to be really good at sports and competitive disciplines, it's not that they then become really confident. They're just the guys who don't think like that. They have almost like a very neutral mentality. They have that kind of like the fuck is that, Mika Hakkinen type thing, where it's more like you have no personality, therefore you don't get nervous, you just do your job. Like, I'm doing my job and I'm trying to race in the car and very, very good driving. I take him over, he take me over. Okay, maybe next time I win. This time I'm trying my best, and like that sort of thing. Like they are boring, and that's actually part of what makes them good at the fundamentals of the game. But they don't have like a killer drive. They're not some like Ayrton Senna type motherfucker who's just going ham, or some simple type dude. So I don't know. The Finnish scene's always been a bit of an enigma, and I've only come to some basic conclusions over the years. Although admittedly I did live in Finland for a few months, so I got a little tiny little insight as a foreigner. Let's see. Chris Abram, if you had to create a League of Legends team based on 5 players from 5 different regions, which players would you choose? Language and personality don't have to be factors. Now, the thing is, he just says create a team, like not create the best team, just create a team. So actually, I'm just going to take that remit and take it as I want it. So I'm just creating a team. This is not about being the best team, it's just making a team that I think would be interesting. So what I would do is I would get Forgiven from H2K, and I would put him with Afromu from CLG, because I think Afromu is one of the only people who could handle Forgiven in this way and really would work well with him, and they would be an insane lane duo. They would be absolutely amazing. And I think if Forgiven had a guy who was like a shot caller there, that's the only part that I'm a bit concerned about, is that Forgiven's going to lead the lane there. But if he had a shot caller and a guy where he had confidence in him, maybe he could delegate some of that and not be as concerned about the rest of the team, like the fucking jungler. So I would put those two together as my bot lane. As a mid laner, I would have Froggen, because what's great about Froggen is he has never been bad at League of Legends. He has for a certain point in time, and he had some real-life drama that was actually contributing to that, but that was like maybe a few games in the spring of 2015. Even in the summer, when the team wasn't very good, he was pretty good again as a player and really doing his best within his style to win. So I think he would be a super sick, stable mid laner who's not going to lose lane, not going to get styled on, not going to get solo killed, going to win lane, going to get advantages, going to get the odd kill if you come and jungle for him. And with this team, we're going to have a really strong mid and bot lane there. Now, in terms of the top laner, I'm going to pick someone who's more on the supportive end of the equation to complement these guys. So the person I'm actually going to pick is, let me think, who do I want as my top laner in this scenario? Because I'm not trying to make the best team, I'm trying to make an interesting team that I think would be worthwhile. Let me see, who would I pick for this one? What teams have we got out there? Because it has to be someone who isn't just going to be too carry focused, that's the thing. So actually, I might pick Haunter actually for this. I think he would do a really good job working with these guys, and then if depending on the game, could give him the odd game to potentially carry. But in general, he's going to play that like tank style. He's going to play that supportive style. He's going to be a good top laner. He's going to teleport in when we need him to. And we've now got pretty solid lanes. So now in terms of my jungler, because that's the last position I've got left, I mean, for this team, just to make it fun, I probably would just put Jankos, actually. I've always thought Jankos and Froggen would be an amazing duo. I've always thought that's the duo they should have. Because if you give Froggen any advantage in lane, I mean, he's not going to lose it, put it that way. And he's going to gradually build on it, and it's going to be incredibly hard for the other mid to get back in the game. So if you have Jankos, who, by the way, let's say pre-15 minutes, is one of the best junglers from any region I've ever seen. His ability to make shit happen consistently in that first 15 minutes is unbelievable. I can see why Forgiven did an interview like during playoffs where he said that like some mad thing like Jankos is the best player in Europe. Even though he's not, because he doesn't really live up to it all the time, I can see what he means. Like, it is uncanny, his ability to do that. So I think if you put this guy with Froggen, what an insane combo that would be. And the good thing about Haunter is he's low econ, so he can take care of himself top lane. We don't necessarily need to feed him. So I think this would be an amazing team. I didn't try to build a super good team there. I just put players I'm interested in and players that I think would work well together. I think that would be a pretty cool team to have. Let's see. Let's see. Do you think that the reckless mentality of considering you can do better than someone you see performing in a sport/job/competition is sometimes crucial to power one's drive to become the best? To a degree, but it all depends how you harness it. The problem is, there's times when people like Simple, like Forgiven, like Double Lift, they have that drive, and if it was harnessed a different way, they would become amazing, as they have done at times in their careers and been the best player. At times, it has fueled them to become bitter, resentful, stubborn. That's when it has been not necessarily good, and obviously sometimes been channeled into frustration at their teammates. So I think on some level, you have to have that reckless mentality. Like, you'll notice with all of these players, what makes them at their peak absolutely insane is they will do things that other players would not even conceive of, because they have this insane level of confidence matched with the ability to pull it off, that they'll do the most amazing things. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that a guy who really actually does showcase this is Faker. On a deep level, Faker doesn't think anyone's better than him, or if they are, he knows if he keeps working, he can be better than them. And Faker has the ability to visualize and to execute things that should not be possible and are so incredibly abusive and greedy, but he makes them work to a success rate that just should not be possible. And so I think to some degree, yes. I think in general, though, the drive to become the best should probably be based more on the idea of just like, I'm going to build myself into the best, not just the idea that everyone else is shit and I'm going to prove I'm better. Like, that's like more like an anime, like a little bit more of an immature story. Like, it's cool in its own ways, and it can be used as a driving tool if you know what you're doing and you reflect and you purposely push your buttons in that way. But I don't think it should be the overarching thing ultimately. Like, I've gotten a lot more out of my own career during the years where I just worked to be the best person I could be, regardless of who was the best out there and who was having success, rather than thinking I was really better and I'd beat this guy if I got a chance. I don't think that's ever really done a whole lot for me. I think that actually can be paralyzing, where people are like, oh, it's just unfair, there's nothing I can do, is it? Life's just against me. That's the sort of thing that paralyzes people. Let's see. Damien Dwyer, what are your thoughts on geographic location dictating quality? Do you believe not having the option to attend majors in person will affect the ability to produce quality content regarding the scene? No, that sounds like you're setting itself as in a woe me, martyr excuse as to why you can't do something. You can have an entire career, make a good salary, become quite well known, develop your skills, have an amazing, a lot of fun and adventure without ever going to an event, without ever having an opportunity gifted you, battling to get it yourself, and if you're good enough, getting to that point in time. You don't ever have to go to a physical event and get access to players and do an interview. That's not necessary. I didn't get all those advantages. I came from one of the worst areas in the UK you could come from to be successful in. It took me years to earn a lot of these things. I had to be incredibly... Here's something a lot of people don't know about me compared to my peers. I got to a lot of my early opportunities by literally innovating the idea, giving it to my boss, which would then make my boss rich. And as a result, guess what? He then paid me a much higher salary than other people and gave me special luxuries that other people didn't get. No one else is doing that, I know, as some up-and-coming guy in some particular sense. So yeah, it's not as simple as just like getting given opportunities. Like, it's not about what you start with. It's about what you've got inside, what you're able to develop, what your mindset is going forwards, how much of an asshole you are to people. Let's see. Let me see this one here. When you think back on the interviews you have done, was there a moment that stands out as a time, this is by John Dubois, that stands out as a time that you were most tilted and thrown off by something a person you were interviewing said? Not really. I mean, there's been people where I felt like the only time it tilts me a bit is when I feel like the person, from knowing them maybe more than I might appear to on camera, is like not being genuine, and even the way they're telling you their answer is like they're almost reveling in the fact that they're giving a stupid PR answer and that they're just using stupid logic, like, well, I mean, every player at the top level is a good player, so I couldn't say he's not a good player compared to me. Like, you know, that's maybe the only thing that like mildly tilts me. And even then, it's more the fact that we're not really accomplishing it. This is kind of a waste of time. That's the part that tilts me. Not that the guy gave the answer, but I always give people the freedom to say whatever answer they want. I might ask a follow-up or press them a little bit, but ultimately, I always accept whatever their answer is. And it's a myth, the idea that like somehow I like make them say what I want them to say. I don't know where that came from. I'd imagine projection from people's own insecurities. So I'm not really tilted. In general, like, it's just frustrating if you don't feel like you're getting a good interview. Not that the quotes have to be right, but you don't feel like he's even being authentic to himself or giving... It's not entertaining even in itself, the way he's describing it. He's wasting his time with a boring PR answer. So, I mean, that can be kind of boring in that sense. I mean, let me think. Is there a good example of that? Okay, I'll give you an example, actually. Fuck it, I'll call someone out. Because this is someone where... I think, unfortunately, this guy has a rep for being wonderful with the media and a really great guy. And in some senses, I've no doubt he is. But there are areas in which I've known he can be quite hostile to casters, before he was on himself, and at times interviewers in a way that's actually quite unfair. I've noticed this pattern. So it's actually the player, Warcraft 3 legend and StarCraft 2 OK player, Grobby, the Dutch player, who's obviously a World Games champion, one of the all-time great esports players. But I once did an interview with him. You'd have to go back and find it. I think it was an Assembly Winter 2011, so like February of 2011. And I did an interview with him about his career. And all he did was, I asked questions where I touched on things that were difficult about his career or difficult about his life without wrecking him on some of them. Some of them were things that might have been embarrassing, and just touched on them to give him the opportunity to address them in any manner he wanted. And all he did is constantly spin the question back as though, like, he didn't understand. What does that mean? Like, I don't even understand what you're asking. That sort of a gist to it, as though either he was an idiot or actually with his tone, unfortunately, as though I was an idiot and I was the one who was inarticulate and wasn't saying anything and like was asking a question that didn't even make sense and he couldn't even comprehend what it was very, very condescending. And I have to say, from seeing a few other things, I think just as a lot of people probably he is a good guy, but for whatever reason with me, he didn't vibe with me, and he had this ridiculously hostile manner, and so as a result, I don't think the interview was particularly good in that sense overall. And I think it was actually him to some degree ruining it, because I actually came into that with a very open mind. It's someone where I had no negative feelings about him, and I hoped we would get a really good interview, and that would give him kind of a platform to talk about some things. And it felt like a rare example. This very rarely ever happens to me, because I've put a lot of time into learning how to like win people over and how to settle them and to be like, listen, you know, we don't have to be friends here, mate, but let's try and get the best interview we can here and do a good job here. And if you think a question's not good or whatever, you can come back, or you don't have to answer it or whatever. I do a lot of work like that to put the person at ease. So the idea that this guy was like continuously hostile to me and derogatory and condescending, not really a fan of that, quite frankly. So that's a good example of where I was like mildly tilted, because I just thought, great, waste of time working with this guy, isn't it? And it's no surprise that I noticed in his career after that, he tended to pick people who were easy interview subjects, who he could manipulate, or just he wouldn't ask him the questions he didn't want asked. So a guy called, let's have a look, Killian HB. How much do you think NiP's early dominance in CSGO has influenced the long-term meta of the game and the overall style of play? For example, if a different team with a very different style had been that successful early on instead of NiP, do you think the way teams play the game today would be very different, or do you think it would have evened out to where we are now anyway? Now, first of all, this is a fantastic question, because it actually questions premises and preconceptions people have about the game, that they think it just has to be played this way, those styles have always been the most successful. I actually think NiP's style in early CSGO is just a decent to pretty good style. Like, essentially, it's quite a loose style, but with people generally filling the roles that you need in a team, that if you have amazing players, they will then be able to dominate the game. But except for rare occasions, so I'll go through a couple of them off the top of my head. LDLC late 2014, early 2015 Envious, which I admit it, arguably were only the best team in the world for like a month based on results, and we're in the era of the Fnatic team that I consider the best of all time, so maybe not even the best. Then we've got NIP, the original one, and then finally we've got Fnatic, end of 2015, early 2016, who were the best in the world. These are the teams that played the most ridiculous loose style, yet were really good from it and could be very, very good. I do think NiP's dominance made people think that was how you played CSGO. Made people think that is the best style, abandon tactics, don't play with more like supportive style players, don't play that, just play this overall style you've got. And so as a result, I think that did warp people's minds. I think if Very Games somehow had shocks from the beginning of CSGO and they'd been the best team, actually it would have instilled more tactical approach, would have instilled more team role system approach that took, for me, aside from Existence's team, about 2 or 3 years to develop, when we finally got people like Na'Vi, like Luminosity, who really took that to a really, really high level that only really the Very Games teams before had gone to. I do think that influenced people. I think today people still think you just play that super loose style and it's somehow going to work for you, but you see it doesn't work for some of these teams. FaZe being an obvious one. I also think that people put too much on the style of NiP in early CSGO, thinking that was how you play, whereas their style was so skewed by A, having the two best players in the game, Get Right and Forest at the beginning, and B, having the best player in the game by far in Get Right, who was also playing an extremely unique, super dedicated lurk role and dominating from it. So it made people think you need a dedicated lurk who just always waits last and goes 1v4 and that's how you play. That's not how you lurk. I think he actually warped into some degrees, ruined a lot of players in that sense. In the same, not by his own fault, by the way, he was fantastic at it, he did his own job, but people thinking they can just be Get Right. And then as a result, people also thinking, it kind of reminds me of how people often say that like Michael Jordan ruined the shooting guard position, because before Michael Jordan, shooting guards didn't dominate the game and weren't the star player of a team and had the whole game based around them. But after that, all these shooting guards wanted to be the scoring leader and take all the shots in the game and take the last shot every time and just go away from the team-based aspect of the game. So people who weren't as good as Michael Jordan couldn't pull it off and to some degree half ruined their teams, Allen Iverson, Carmelo Anthony style, even though they were fantastic individual players, but they weren't efficient. So I think in that sense, Get Right to some degree ruined the game. But then again, by the way, that happens in every game. Like in 1.6, people like Forrest and Heaton, by their own successes and being fantastic in their own extreme playing styles, ruined the game by making people want to be a worse version of a Forrest or a Heaton and not being as good and ruining teams. So yeah, I think this is an interesting question. I think it's got a lot to it. But I actually like his end conclusion, which is that would it have evened out to about where we are now anyway? Yeah, I think it would have. It just might have happened sooner, basically. And I think that we still haven't got enough tactical approach now as it is. Like, I think, unfortunately, the coaching change has hit Na'Vi quite hard in that sense. And so saw that drop away. We've still got quite a few good tactical teams. But I think, here's the problem. Just as Get Right warped people to thinking that you have to play CSGO in this like super open style and let every star player do whatever he wants. I think also, unfortunately, Existence's continued failure at the majors, I mean, I know for a fact it put off those French players at the top of the scene so they didn't want to play with him. That's made people think you can't play a really tactical style, which I think is bullshit. I think that's certainly not the case. But unfortunately, just as someone being incredibly over successful at a style made people think is the best, a guy being very unsuccessful just at the majors with that style, fantastic elsewhere, the tactical style, unfortunately skewed people to be biased against the tactical style. I think what's good about CSGO is you can play all these styles. Now, not as much as 1.6, where all those styles, there was more of a spread, but I still think you can play on these different ends of the spectrum, and you probably, most teams should have a bit of both. But you could definitely be amazing at the extremes and be good. Now, a guy called North Thug Rain says, what does FaZe need to do to get top 5? They certainly have the firepower. I agree they have the firepower. But first and foremost, here would be my simple suggestions. 1, try getting players who are all on the same page communication-wise. So, for example, put Danish and Norwegian players together. There's one suggestion to improve communication and team play. 2, get a dedicated in-game leader who could play in this team. Get like an MSL, get a Glaive, get someone like that in the team. 3, get some good support players within the mix. Imagine if someone like Rubino played for FaZe. Imagine if someone like Zipnix played for FaZe. Now, I think you'd see some of those star players brought out and enhanced. I also think, by the way, Jacob is an extremely skilled player, but without a really good in-game leader, he will be wasted as he continues to be within that team. You need an in-game leader in the game, microing him to some degree when he's not on his game to be able to be useful in the game still, because he's a fantastic player, or has the potential to be. Let's have a look. Let's see. Let's see. Is there, Jamie McDonald, is there any piece of advice you've received that was particularly valuable to you? Or do you have any advice that you wish you'd been given earlier in your life? Hope this isn't too mundane. I mean, I've obviously given a lot of it already so far in this video, like, like working on things, like finding a way to be inspired by things, doing things you love, blah, 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 all that stuff. Finding ways to be productive throughout the day, no matter how you feel. I would say a simple one would probably be, it's not about getting an opportunity. It's not about getting one opportunity. It's about being ready and being patient enough that when you get multiple opportunities, you can do to your own satisfaction your best, and eventually some of them are going to work out. I would say that's the general piece of advice I'd give. Let's see. Now, with your coverage of Overwatch, do you think it's a competitively viable esport? How much Overwatch have you been watching? I've watched a bunch of the offline LANs and the big teams there, and I'm gradually getting into it. I'm certainly nowhere near an expert. A lot of people know a lot more than me, but I'm going to bring my own perspective to it. Do I think it's a competitively viable esport? Yes. The question is how much. Like, does it have to be the 4th biggest esport? Certainly could be, and that could be fine, by the way. Can it be a top 3 one? I mean, it's got a lot of reasons as to why it could. Groundswell of players playing it. People want to see tournaments for it. It's gradually building viewer base. Blizzard's going to invest a lot of money. Whether it can get there, I don't know. I mean, I've got my own ideas on some of the spectating issues that they have, but I do think that's been overblown by people. Like, the idea that you can just watch a game once and know what's going on, like, that's ridiculous, man. People who say that about Counter-Strike are the ones who think it's all just about fucking headshots and buying an AWP. They don't know anything about the tactics, so no, it's not that simple. I think that's been overblown, but I'll address some of these topics in videos in the future as I get better conclusions myself. Do you play... This is Go... Habs Go, but with a 4. So obviously he's a fan of the Montreal Canadiens. Do you play single-player video games? And if so, what are some of your favourites? No, I have barely played any single-player game since I got into esports in 2001 in terms of working. It's all been about multiplayer games and the discipline of sport and competition at that point in time. Just all my time I've dedicated to that, not that interested in single-player games. I think in general, my type of single-player game doesn't really thrive anymore. I like single-player games that are like either very open-ended, so for example, Frontier Elite 2, where you're in this like spaceship and you can go through all different, like kind of like EVE Online, but like a single player game, and there was no set storyline. It generated the missions and stuff, and you could do all different things in the universe. That was like a cool game. I also liked games that were like very cerebral games, like Deus Ex or System Shock Or what else have we got up there? Oh, I love point and click adventure games back in the day. Day of the Tentacle, Monkey Island, those sorts of things. So these sorts of games in general don't really exist. I mean, sure, there's Bioshock. Oh, Thief, that's another one of my favorites. But in general, this sort of game isn't like the biggest type of game anymore. In general, isn't as popular. And plus, I don't really, it's not something I'm dedicating my time to. I'm not really a gamer in that sense as much more. I'm like an esports gamer or something. I was interested in that. So that period of my life, I mean, listen, I've already still played more single-player games than most people have in their entire life and a lot more hours. I mean, I spent like most of my childhood and my early adult life doing that. So it's not a big deal to me that I'm not doing that right now. I've got other things I'm into. Right. This guy asks about should like Tuscan come back? Like, should there be new maps created to replace old ones? Should we fix old maps? Like, what makes a good map? Should we bring warbanging back? Okay, here's the thing. No one can really know what makes a good map. Like, so far, I mean, I'm not map makers, I haven't studied it either. I haven't seen what the principles are that make a good map in general. I mean, I think some basic things are fairly obvious, like there shouldn't be too many limited choke points. There should be multiple ways into a bomb site, but not too many that the CTs get ridiculously overwhelmed. Those seem like basic principles, but beyond that, I think we only really know how great a map is once the best teams in the world get a hold of it and unpick it and start playing it in the way they play it. They're the ones who teach us what the best maps are. Do I think we should create new maps? I think, yes, they should be working on 2 or 3 new maps all times. They should introduce one at a time, not at the major. Like, how about right after the major is when you introduce the new map, and then people get used to it and see if they still want to play it by the next major. I think that's a good system. And in terms of Tuscan, the problem with Tuscan is like that version seems to be completely broken. It's just never going to come back. I think Tuscan was an all-right map in CS 1.6. I wasn't a fan of it personally. My favourite version of it was when it was Mill, and it was actually CT-sided, not C-sided. Thought Mill was very good, but unfortunately, Mill was owned by the CPL, which is a tournament organiser, therefore you couldn't use it in ESWCs and stuff. But I'd love it if we could have Mill. And actually, ironically, we had Mill at the beginning of CSGO, but we don't have it anymore. As everyone knows who saw that famous JW video where VirtusPro, well, ESC at the time, thought he was wall hacking. But he tells me that it was some sort of demo bug on the smokes. The Byron Claw. Have you ever been able to talk to Riot about your LOL content such as SI? Have they ever shown interest in sponsoring it? It gets more views than their IPL segment, question mark. Like, I don't know if it gets more views than their PTL segment, rather. I don't watch PTL, like I haven't seen the view numbers for that. I'd imagine PTL probably does all right. Seems like an all right show. Not something I'm interested in personally. I mean, I like my own shit. I'm pretty kind of niche in that sense. Have they ever shown interest in sponsoring it? No, not in any sense. Riot doesn't actually seem to want to spread any of its wealth around to like esports journalism in general. They have LoL Esports, but LoL Esports famously for many years was this mad prison where you go there and you're not allowed to write more than 1,000 words, and they tell you sometimes what topic you can write about, and sometimes you have an amazing idea and you can't write it because someone else has written on that topic about something totally different. All sorts of mad things like that. And that's also one of the reasons why I have a little bit of acrimony towards Miri, since he played a key part in that and propped all that up, and sometimes even was one of the decision makers in that, and I think actually limited a number of fantastic writers' careers who now are known some of the best writers in esports history, but didn't really get to show us their skills and chops until they left LoL Esports. And I'm glad to say I played a good role in helping some of them do that and get much better pay, much better opportunities, and actual respect from their editors elsewhere. So, in terms of the first part, by the way, have I ever talked to Riot about my LOL content such as I've never talked to Riot. Never happened. Never had a conversation with some head guy from Riot, except maybe the odd comment at like a bar or in a friendly situation with Nick Allen because he was a friend of Travis's. That's about it. And even then, it was never any official capacity. Riot has never spoken to me. Riot has never acknowledged I exist. Riot has never treated me with any respect or welcomed me in or tried to partner with me or tried to do work with me and do interviews with me. And people now are just going to go, yes, because you're hostile against them, blah, blah, blah. No. That's after they fucked with me and done ridiculous things to people like me and my friends over the years and been very rude and condescending to me. Now I don't like them. Yeah. And since I don't need to work with them, yeah, I fuck with them a bit. But in the early days, I was absolutely open to doing interviews with people. I'd said nothing controversial about Riot or any of its players or anything like that. They were just incredibly arrogant and hostile from the beginning. And here's the thing, it's not that they now developed because people were bad to them and mean to them like people think now because the idiots only came along a year ago and are retconning all of history. It's not that that's the case. What happens is Riot was so ridiculous in the early days to how they behaved towards people who were in the scene of esports and the grassroots community that those people all over a progressive span of 2 or 3 years all became incredibly embittered and resentful towards towards these assholes that now they are just all going guns blazing, like, fuck this Riot company. And so it's Riot who created that. It's like TSM fans are like, yeah, the only reason TSM fans don't like you is because you say mean things about TSM. No, it's the other way around, mate. That's the cart before the horse. I only ever started really wrecking TSM after their fans had fucked with me so much. I was like, you know what? I'm going to really enjoy wrecking this team's fans. So, no, they've never talked to me in any context. And as a result, no, there's never been any suggestion of any of that stuff. Now, luckily, it's not necessary at all for my career, and they would only exert control at this point in time anyway. But I do think if they'd wanted to do something cool, we could have done some interviews in the early days. I think that some of their casters could have come off a lot better. I think, for example, a perfect example for me would be someone like Freak. I actually think from the odd interaction I've had with Freak, not seeing him say ridiculous things on Reddit, I think if I did an interview with this guy, in my style, where I kind of like give the person space to explain things and I give them a full room to give the context and why they think that way and what buttons, I actually think he would have a lot of his personality that now is a bit kind of like people are a bit against him and think he's just sucks Riot's dick. I think actually he would come off a lot better and people would kind of understand him more as a person. So that's an example of someone where it's not that I'm super fascinated by him a guy, but I think that's an obvious example where it would have helped Riot, by the way, if I'd done an interview with him. But never going to happen. Not a problem for me. League of Legends is not the main game for me anymore. Probably won't be the main game going forwards. I'll still be around esports when League of Legends is long gone and possibly Riot Games is long gone. I was here before, was having a great time before, had a good time since then, had a good fun on my talk show, and I'll be here afterwards. So Riot can do whatever they want and have a good life. Right. Let's have a look. Quinn. Just name Quinn. Oh, by the way, just as a side note, totally irrelevant to say this, but is there anything more tilt-worthy than when someone locks in Quinn as AD carry as opposed to top laner? Anyone who does that, that's one of the few things in life that actually can tilt me a little bit. Like, I just realised the game's over at that point already. So, of the world-class players in CSGO stuck in Elo Hell, Nico, Device, Rain, etc., what do you think about them moving to an NA team like C9 or Optic? Do you think that could push those teams into true world beaters? Assuming, of course, they either get out of or wait out their current contracts. The problem is none of those people you just mentioned or people like them want to go to NA. The only one I ever found who was a skilled player in Elo Hell at a slightly lower level was Oscar, and he did seem up for going to NA, but he'd already signed with Mousesports at the time. Sadly, we saw how that worked out. Otherwise, all those guys, like especially the Scandinavians, in general, Scandinavians do not want to move to NA. Pimp only moved on like the second or third round of people asking him. The first time, he decided against it. They don't want to. They want to live in Scandinavia. I mean, because they're reasonably antisocial people in Scandinavia, it seems like they have a really strong connection to their mothers and their families, and they want to be like around a safe environment, so they don't want to just go away and live in America. That's not I know Americans think like America's the promised land. It's not the dream for so many people out there to actually go and live in America. Yeah, a lot of poor people do, mate, but a lot of other people actually think, like, for example, Denmark's a pretty wicked country. I'll just stay there. So the problem is the obvious candidate should be Nico, because he plays for a shit team at the moment. He's fantastic. He's Bosnian anyway, so he can't play for a Bosnian team or a team from fucking ex-Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia or whatever the fuck all that shit is. And so you'd think he'd be the candidate, but unfortunately he's young and he has loyalty mouse and he doesn't want to go to NA. So I agree, it'd be cool if, like, for example, Rain and Nico did go to NA. I think that could be amazing and could make those teams really world class, but I don't think it's going to happen. And I do think, actually, though, that if, like, for example, Nico went to C9, that C9 could be more than they ever will be otherwise. But I just don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately. Min T. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Still covering esports, another field? I don't know. At the moment, I have no waning interest in esports. I've found ways to replenish it and make it more interesting by improving myself and changing myself as a person. It means I come back to when it's fresh all the time. So I could easily work at esports my whole life. But what I am reasonably sure of is that I will probably always do things in this style. I'll obviously try to improve it and get better, etc. But in this style of how making ideas, executing on them, delivering a product, finding a way to get paid for that, doing things on my own terms and at my own times and where I want to. I'll probably always do that approach. So maybe it won't always be for esports. Maybe I'll expand into other stuff, like I'm going to make a second channel soon. But I do think it's the case that, like, if I'm not around esports, I'll be doing things in an esports kind of way anyway. Let's see. LOL is actually his name, believe it or not. How are you such a thug on the analyst desk? Also, who do you rate as the top 5 players individually in CSGO? In terms of being a thug on the analyst desk, I would assume he means in terms of, like, you know, like baller mentality, like confident in myself, etc. Well, that's another thing. In life, because I'm prepared, because I've thought about what I'm saying, because I'm trying to say things I think are authentic, I'm not worried to put them out there. And I don't mind if people think I'm wrong, and I don't mind if people say, oh, if a joke isn't funny, or they just think the analysis is shit. That's all fine. I'm comfortable with that, and I'm comfortable that, to my own satisfaction, and doing things the way I want to do them. So as a result, I have a confidence that comes from that. Now, I wasn't confident in much of my life in the past, especially not as a younger adult, but it's something that developed over time for some of these reasons and things that I've got into in that particular sense. And so now I'm someone who comes off as incredibly confident because I'm a self-actualized person, because I kind of have a sense of who I am. Now, not in a definitive sense, like this is what I am, I'm this person who does this. More in the sense that I can go different ways in my life. I can expand, I can work on this aspect, develop this part of myself. I allow myself to be 10 different people at once, and to be one person on an analysis desk, and one person with my friends, and one person with my lover, and one person with family, and one person with like my bosses, and one person with an interview subject. And in doing this, I express a lot of different aspects of myself, so I'm comfortable with how I do it in that sense. So it's more comfort mixed with showmanship and trying to entertain that makes me seem like a thug. Now, in terms of who do I rate as the top 5 players individually in CSGO, again, this is the sort of content, if I want to go ham on it, I should really do my own video, so I'll do a quick version. Let's go. Let's start out. Number 1, we're going to say... let's see, number 1. At the moment, I think number 1's incredibly contested because SK's barely played at tournaments. But everyone's barely played. So you know what? Fuck it. Right now, as of this moment, I'll actually say, just for this moment, Simple's the best player in CSGO. There we go. Number 1. I'll say number 2 is Nico. I think he's still a super sick player. I've number 2, Nico. Number 3, Cold Zero. He had a poor tournament at ESL1 New York, and we haven't seen him play since the majors, so he just hasn't played enough recently to get that number 1 spot. Number 4, Shocks, absolutely insanely bananas, great player. And number 5, let's see, who should be the 5th best player in the world? I think I might go with Device still. Amazingly consistent player, and yet on an incredibly whack team that has got all problems with it, but he still delivers again and again and again. I think it's pretty legit to have him there. Another option could have been Dennis. I think I wouldn't be that bad, but he's only had 1 LAN, obviously, in the recent history. Let's have a look here. Goran Hagensen. Could you talk a little bit about Real? It is probably too late for him now, but how good do you think he could have been if he started playing CSGO seriously at the beginning? I actually did an article for On Gamers, so you're going to have to search like GameSpot now, I think it's called. Search like GameSpot, like players who could have been the best in 1.6, or no, players who like, it's something like players who could have been great at CSGO, and I think he was a name in there, because the thing is, Real was a player from Norway who was a fucking prodigy. At age 15, he was the carry of a team with, actually a guy who was pretty bad, like a Hunden tech character, called Jungle Bobo, and he managed to win a fucking event with this guy on his team, as a 15-year-old on LAN, against like NIP, SK, like a pretty sick field overall. Not the best team field at the time, but a pretty sick field. And he was just a guy whose talent level was one of the highest we've ever seen in CS 1.6. Unfortunately, he's a guy where the Norwegian scene decayed around him, key players quit, and so he just started playing semi-professionally. Then he got into poker, so he was making a lot of money and was dedicated to that. The story in Norway, from knowing Vendetta and people like that, is always that Real comes back, he starts saying to everyone, like, yeah, let's play CS for like a couple of weeks. Within a couple of games, he's going ham, he's getting insane, he's dropping 30 bombs all over the place, he's being like a god, and then he just gets sick of it and he goes away again. So I think in CSGO, he could have been very, very good. I can't be sure of it. It's a bit like Ruith from Finland in that sense. And so unfortunately, I don't think it's ever going to happen, unfortunately. He's a guy who didn't really have the same drive to be great in some senses, but then also didn't have the opportunity that some of the other players from Sweden, etc. had. Let's see. Naiku, what do you think about importance of mental health? I actually think in as much as your mind really does control how happy you are and how you identify with yourself and your place in the world, I think mental health is actually, in some sense, literally the most important topic in the entire of society. First of all, in terms of how we help people, how we treat them, seems very simplistic the way like the medical profession does deal with a lot of these people, and seems more like just getting them out of the way, not necessarily dealing with the problems. Then you've got all the fuckery involved with like big pharma clearly sponsoring studies and fucking with government that doesn't allow us to get proper help to some of these people. Then you've got to add in the mental health things, which aren't people having like a direct mental illness, but more like society produces such ridiculous, irrational aspects within our personalities and has so many absurd things we have to accept as normal that people do become drug addicts and just ruin their lives and become mentally unstable and neurotic about themselves, etc. I think all this is tied into this aspect. And so first and foremost, I'd like society to do a much better job with this and do it from a place of compassion, not like dealing with people like you're mopping up a floor, like mop to aisle 7, spillage, like not like that. More like, how do we really help rehabilitate these people and get them into a productive place? Then adding in aspects like, for example, hopefully people can take more personal responsibility and not just be martyrs and be like, people made me like this, and can kind of be self-reflective and work on themselves. I mean, the whole thing of essentially alchemy and the occult is to some degree about trying to purify, trying to perfect yourself, who you are inside, and try and work on that and elevate it to a higher level. Now, they might get a bit lost in the metaphor and some kind of flowery ideas, but the general gist is very good, and there's not enough of that out there. I mean, I guess you've got some more secular stuff in like Ken Wilber's work, and Alan Watts takes it a little bit less hardcore, and you've got Buddhism, obviously. It's not a bad area if you don't get too caught up in all the kind of metaphor of that. A pretty good way of like helping some of these aspects of your life. So I think it's a very important topic. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on it, so I can't speak to it much beyond my personal experience. Let's have a look. I'm only going to do a few more questions now. Let's have a look. So okay, a guy who called Raw Dota says he's got a channel and a website that he's making Dota content on. He wants to know, what's his advice to make content written on YouTube to turn it from a passion to a job and a job to a career, and then how does he advise we do it? Now, first of all, I've got a whole topic, which is actually, I did a video on it, and there's going to be more in the series about where are the journalists. I've got a couple more coming about some of these topics and my advice, but I would generally say don't think of it of how to turn it from a passion to a job to career. First things first, work on it to your own satisfaction to find out if you like it day to day, and then try and get really good to your level on that and get it to a level where you're really proud of it and you think it's really good. Like the idea that you're already thinking about how to make money and how to make a career out of it, like at the beginning, that's too much, mate. Like you don't literally never have baked anything in your life and then just say, you know what, I'm going to try and make a really successful cake business and I'm going to go all in and quit everything else and start on that right now. No, what you do is you enjoy baking, you figure out some recipes, you try to get good, people tell you this is pretty good, you start putting it out there, or maybe go to like fairs and fetes and just sell some on the side, and then what happens is gradually there's a natural progression of resistance giving way, opportunities appearing, you're taking advantage of them, and you becoming eventually paid and in some sense semi-pro and pro, and also you don't reverse engineer it from that. That suggests to me that your main goal is actually to get a career out of it. If it's really something you enjoy, that will sustain you initially, then you can start figuring out some of the other parts. And by the way, you don't know yet if you'd actually enjoy it as a job, so you've got to test these things out just as the job has to test you out. So I'd say watch the other videos, and that's like a general piece of advice. Antoine Serena, do you think that building a successful team around a god player is nearly impossible in LOL because of the meta evolving so fast? Yes, to a degree. I mean, the only person it's worked around is Faker. And then even then, he has had the same coach and same org his whole career. And they have done kind of like San Antonio Spurs thing where Tim Duncan got a little bit overrated because they did get amazing teams built around him. I don't think Faker's overrated in that sense, but I think he has gotten some good teammates pretty consistently overall and some pretty good talent with him. And so I think Faker's an outlier in that sense in every aspect in League of Legends. So I think it does make sense to me that like teams with Wei Zhao at one point in time were like the fourth best in China, and teams with Forgiven couldn't even make the playoffs in Europe, and teams with Froggen weren't that good eventually, and teams with Flame couldn't win the OGN title. Like I think just being a god player, unfortunately in League isn't good enough because they can literally switch the meta so that you as a carry can't carry anymore. They can do shit like that. And then even worse, it's not just Riot's fault. People in League are so obsessed with day-to-day results that they will also do stupid stuff like have a team in which they don't have a carry top laner, but because it switches to carries, they'll be like, you should just play them. That's the way to play League of Legends correctly. And then wonder why they get their heads kicked in. Like instead of being like, okay, we can't play the meta necessarily, but we're going to play to our strengths elsewhere and do what's good, even though we're going to be outside the meta a little bit. I think people are too insistent on that. Let's see. Just a couple more, I think. So Leon 3V. So Leon. See, that's not a number, mate. Like you can't have the 3 and then the V. Like that doesn't work actually. That's not like 2, for example. You hinted a couple of times that you're into the books of Robert Anton Wilson. I really liked his novels and wondered which one is your favourite and why. I already talked in the first video actually about Robert Anton Wilson like influencing my thoughts in some ways. But this aspect, the part about his novels, because obviously like the best Robert Anton Wilson work in general is non-fiction stuff. He's a really fantastic writer in that sense, especially on like the fringe stuff and the counterculture and psychedelic 60s. So in terms of his novels, I think his best novel probably is just the original one, right? It's probably just the Illuminatus trilogy. I mean, what a basic concept for anyone who wasn't ready is imagine that every conspiracy theory that had been heard of to any degree by like the 1970s, all were real, all existed simultaneously, and all were happening at the same time, and different people in this universe that he creates are experiencing it, and then historical characters, and it's trying to span all of time and history and also be in specific moments, and it jumps all around all over the place. I mean, just a fantastic book, like really out there, really mind-expanding, psychedelic book, just a lot of fun to read. And so I think that's one of the all-time greats, so that's the obvious one I have to go with. Let's have a look. Funny assortment. Do you think the Counter-Strike scene has quite a Moneyball philosophy, or are managers and players too subjective with their approach? He means in terms of Moneyball, the idea is that you can look like, oh, I need this many points here, or I need this here, and so I'll get a player like that. People almost never do that in CSGO, actually. I think it's one of the big flaws, and that is a GM approach that I have preached for all of CSGO. That's why I've been able to make some good calls on players you should get, because I say, what do you think the hole is in the team? What can you do at the moment? And what do you need? Now let's look at that type of player, as opposed to trying to recruit just the best player from your country and shove him into that role. So I think in general, it's a better approach. I think people should take that. But I think it's not just about points and frags. It's more about role within the team. It's more about what do you need to fill what holes in the team. Let's see. Let me see here. I've got to make a last couple of them pretty good. Okay, here's a basketball one, actually. I'll do a CS 1.6 one. Cardiac Bubbles. Did 1.6 ever have glaring issues like Global Offensive? Does. OP pistols, AWP nerf, pointless updates. I'm someone that never played or watched 1.6. All I hear are personalities and pros say 1.6 is much better than Global Offensive, but surely 1.6 had its issues as well. No. Now the problem is 1.6 didn't have any issues on the level of the ones you're all listing there. No massive overpowered things or ridiculous problems or problem updates. In general, no. It didn't really have all those things. In fact, it was barely updated for the last sort of like 7, 8 years, 9 years maybe even. It was pretty much wasn't updated. It wasn't the best game ever, by the way. I don't even think it's the best version of Counter-Strike. I preferred 1.3, and then I preferred some of the beta versions like 5.2. These were more arcadey, or you could do more things individually, or they had better spray, or they had better AWP. I preferred these things personally. I think there's going to be better pro games going forwards. So I wasn't even the biggest fan of 1.6. It's just that I didn't know what I had in 1.6 until we played CSGO, and I was like, Jesus, this is a drop-off. And even now, like there's a video on the other day that Hiko had from his stream of him playing 1.6. Even him just playing 1.6 randomly in a server reminded me, Jesus, the gun spray was so phenomenal in that game, and the way you could tap and the way the pistols worked. It's actually sad that you have to forget that a little bit to really get into CSGO to some degree. And no, they didn't have those issues because Valve wasn't fucking with CSGO. Also, Valve didn't make CS 1.6. All they did is tweak it a little bit, limit it a little bit more, and then stop updating it and make all the money off it. The guy who made 1.6 was not a Valve person at the time he made it. So I don't think it's the best 1.6. I don't think CSGO should be like 1.6, but I think 1.6 had certain things that are better than CSGO, that until you find a different solution to do them a different way, I think it's at least worth putting some of them into CSGO that were in 1.6. Let's have a look. Let's see. I'll do a basketball one here because I haven't really done many of those. So Nico Riv. Since I know you're an NBA fan, what are your thoughts on the Golden State Warriors changing the playstyle in the NBA the last couple of years? Taking the Suns' pacing style and maximising its effectiveness. Thoughts on Steph Curry as the best player in the world, or the addition of Kevin Durant during free agency? Okay, I'm not going to go super ham here, but first of all, the part about Golden State Warriors changing the playstyle in the NBA. Funny thing is, the Golden State Warriors, the old one, in like 2007, 2006, with Don Nelson as a coach, who famously loved small ball, was already playing small ball, and the team that beat that Mavs team in the first round of the playoffs there, when the Mavs had won like 69 games, was actually already playing small ball and showing why it could be really good, because you surround people with shooters, you play fast tempo, you play off your point guard. They were doing all this shit, and actually it already showed it had upset potential. Then you added in, especially against teams that didn't have a sick inside presence. That's the point. Dirk Nowitzki wasn't a power player. He was trying to play finesse at the time, and that was one of the issues they had. Then you've got to add in, when he says like them changing the playing style, I actually think people have gone too far the other way. Part of why it works, here's the thing, I think the Suns played that style as well as the Golden State Warriors do now. It's just that the Suns used decent to average three-point shooters except Steve Nash, while the difference is the Warriors have the most ridiculous. They're like that whole thing about Nip skewing the style because they also have insane players at those positions that are doing stuff he can't normally do. What's insane about the Golden State Warriors is they have the best three-point shooter in history in Steph Curry by far, and insane off the dribble, so he can shoot whenever he wants and literally should have the green light at all times. Then you've got one of the top 5 three-point shooters of all time, probably going to go down, is it? And Klay Thompson, who is getting open shots most of the time. So you have the two best three-point shooters in the NBA on one team doing this style, which is going to make it even more abusive. Then you have some decent three-point shooters and some of the other players. I mean, this is just absolutely nuts. I also think the idea that they've changed the style and everyone has to play this way doesn't make sense at all. Like, actually, what's funny is the knock on the Suns and why they never got to a finals and when they never won is like Charles Barkley used to say, if you live by jump shots, you will die by jump shots. The games where you don't have jump shots, you're not going to be able to win. And so the problem was the Suns weren't very good at defense, and they weren't very good once you took away the jump shot. Now, that's why they failed in the playoffs. Now, you take away the jump shot from the Warriors, and we've seen, they kind of fail. When Steph Curry sucks a dick, they have a lot of problems. They need Klay Thompson to go God mode like he did against Oklahoma Thunder in like Game 6 or whatever it was. They don't win, and like they did in Game 7, taking stupid threes, never going inside for fouls, etc. That's a problem that they have. Their defense, admittedly, is a bit better. They've got Andrea Iguodala for a start off than the Suns was. The Suns were really deficient in that area. But I actually think as a style, they're abusing it to the max. And even they're not just like dominating in terms of the playoffs and winning where you play playoff basketball and you don't get easy tic-tac fouls. So I think that's far from a narrative that's over already. Now, Steph Curry, the best player in the world. Yes, but in that Peyton Manning way, where it's like, because every day he's the best player, but maybe in some of the pressure games he's not. I do think he's been a bit underwhelming in the playoffs compared to how insane he is in the regular season. But the difference is, LeBron is definitely a candidate as well, and he just gets it done in the playoffs all day long. I also think Kevin Durant's amazing, but unfortunately I think actually Kevin Durant's career has been held back by playing with Russell Westbrook. I don't particularly like that. Something I'd probably make a video on one day on my other channel. I think that he's going to be fantastic in this team. I think they can get each other open shots all the time. And the key detail to me is now when you're under pressure and the shot is not falling for Steph Curry and for Klay Thompson, you give it to Kevin Durant, you let him work, and this guy will get you shots, and he will be very efficient, and he will close games. So I think that's the key detail. I don't think, by the way, that they're automatically going to win and do as well as they did last season. They will win less games than they did last season. That's my prediction. Because to get Kevin Durant, they lost some of the rest of their team and their bench players, etc. They've actually been weakened in that sense. So they've got an amazing starting five, but they're going to have to really live off that starting five. Almost not as extreme, a la the Heat of LeBron, etc. But admittedly, the Golden State Warriors at least have a better player at the end of the starting five than that Heat team did. But I think they've got some issues in terms of lack of veterans on the bench and lack of players who can contribute much on the bench now. And they've lost a few nuanced, smaller pieces. That was part of why they had, in my opinion, the 72 wins. And I don't think that they'll win that many again this season. But I think they should be able to win the championship. I think they'll be very competitive. Let's have a look here. I wonder if I'll do one more question. Actually, I've got two questions and then I'm going to finish. Okay, so this one, it's a long question. It's by a guy called Mr. Stenvik Team. And he says essentially about seeding, like he says, you talk a lot about seeding system for tournaments like majors, and you've said many times that you're not satisfied with the current system. Addressing that, you would in many situations rank the players differently than the current ranking system does. Does this mean that letting a guy or group of people decide the setting is a better solution than the current one? I don't know much about CSGO, but it sounds a bit weird to me that the seeding system should be decided by some people's opinions. Having concrete rules seems a bit more logical to me, and I guess the worst case scenario is that it could lead to corruption. Right? Yes, it could lead to corruption, but the one thing that annoys me about the way this is always presented is it is always inaccurately presented. They always set it up as though you have this totally objective formula that's put out over here and in no way has any biases and in no way can decide things in a way that's not good, and therefore that's good because no human interaction takes place. Who creates the formula? A person does. So the person who creates the formula, in deciding what criteria he values over others, because you can't just value all criteria equally, that's what the process of seeding is, he is then himself inputting his bias and principles and philosophy to how he sets up the criteria and then letting the machine run. Instead, I'm allowing an aspect where I put in my biases and criteria, but I can then error check and go, that doesn't seem right. Actually, do I have to rethink that and rejig my thing? I can do that in a way the formula can't. So I actually think both of them are human interaction ultimately yielding the result. But I think this one's superior, having the people do it. It's just about getting the right people. Just because there can be corruption, great. There can be corruption in everything, mate. There can be corruption in how you make that system there. You don't solve it by just not having a person involved directly. Like the last question I'll ask is going to be this one. Pat8974, I think that's who it is, says, is Thorin a persona or the real Duncan S? Now, first of all, there is no real Duncan S. Like, everyone, as far as I know, on some degree is changing day to day. And the fact that people are stubborn and try and cling to their personality and their self and all these sorts of things is actually something that causes neurosis, inhibits growth in life, and limits who you can be as a person. Now, is Thorin a persona? Yes, to some degree. Some of it is entertainment, is showmanship, is exaggerated, is more impassioned than I might be if I was just thinking a thought in my own mind. But there's a lot of it is genuine, a lot of it is real, a lot of it is informed by that. It's just dragged through the prism or exaggerated a little bit of showbiz or a camera or however I interact with the outside world. But I also think, as I referenced before, in fact, to reference a concept that actually comes from the English occultist Aleister Crowley, which is that he used to describe different aspects of himself as in like the scientist, the thinker, the lover, the poet, this sort of a thing. And in doing so, I think it's useful because if you think of different parts of yourself and allow them all to exist and switch between them, you will become a lot less, in my opinion, a lot less neurotic and have a lot less mental hang-ups. You'll be able to explore them more. Admittedly, the way Aleister Crowley explored them was a bit fucked up in some respects, and I wouldn't suggest following his example, but in the process itself is fine when you apply it because you're not him. So it won't be an issue in that particular sense. And I think that's probably a good way to end this AMA. A lot of really good questions. Probably answer some more in the future. Maybe if I get to like 1,000 videos or something. Bye-bye.